Chapter 479. In the following period of time, Li Zhou was not the only one who enjoyed such treatment. The other influential people in Qing city who were tied up with him also enjoyed the treatment. Their status and identity were mostly obtained by oppressing the Han people. Now, it was time for them to reap the benefits. The screams on the small platform became louder and louder, causing the people of Jiaoji who were forced to watch the execution to feel their scalps go numb. Because of this, there was some chaos. Some people even wanted to take the opportunity to resist and instigate others to attack the mercenaries. Since they were already prepared, the sharpshooters of the cold front quickly found the troublemakers. The sound of the 95 style was heard from afar. After killing dozens of leaders, the chaotic scene was completely suppressed. After seeing the soldiers shoot and kill without any explanation, everyone became more obedient for the sake of their own lives. Although they became obedient, it did not mean that they would be let off. As the next step was carried out, under the testimony of the Han people, the people of Jiaoji who had bullied them were pulled out from the crowd one by one. Then, they would be put on public trial based on the mistakes they had made. Those who were too vicious were beheaded on the spot. Those who did not commit too serious of a crime were sentenced to a term of imprisonment and would be brought to Qiqian city in the future. As more and more people from Jiaoji were brought out, some of the other people were regretting it while some were rejoicing. Those who regretted it were those who had mistreated the Han people. They were thinking that if they had been kind back then, they would not have to be punished so severely now. It seemed that it was better to be kind to others. Fortunately, there were kind-hearted lords who treated the Han people well. Now, they did not have to worry about being accused by others. All they had to do was to live their lives well. The series of activities of testifying, arresting, public trial, and sentencing lasted from morning to night. However, it was still not completed. According to Yang Qindong, such a public trial would take another day. This was because there were not many people in Qing city. If there were more people, it would take 7 days and 7 nights to finish the trial, just like in Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji. The public trial would continue tomorrow, and it was necessary to eliminate the unstable elements in the city once and for all. At the same time, it was necessary to build up the confidence of the 2,000 Han people. After all, for a period of time, there were some matters that required their help to complete. However, these were no longer important. Under the suppression of the armed forces, the citizens of Jiaoji in the city could no longer cause any trouble. What Yang Qindong needed to consider was what Jiaoji would do after he conquered Qing city and how he should deal with it. Fortunately, the communication system was not advanced. Even if something happened in the city, it would not spread immediately. In other words, Yang Qindong and his men still had time to make all the necessary preparations. After summoning the officers under him, Yang Qindong began to make arrangements in an orderly manner. After an hour, the officers walked out of the barracks. Some of them had satisfied smiles on their faces, just like Chen Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front. There were also some officers who looked dejected. It was obvious that their unit was not the main attacker. If they were not the main attacker, they would not be able to make great contributions. It was no wonder that their expressions were ugly. The one with the ugliest expression was King Lily of Jiaoji, who had just received the news. On the afternoon of the 2nd day after Qing city was conquered, old Lily, who was in his 60s and taking an afternoon nap with his concubine, was woken up by his subordinates. While he was still looking displeased, as if he would punish his subordinates for disturbing him if it wasn't something important, a piece of news made him turn pale with fright. "Your Majesty, there is news from the rear. Qing city has been conquered by the mercenaries." Lily, who was not fully awake yet, widened his eyes when he heard this. Then, he acted as if he did not hear it clearly and asked, "What did you say? Say it again." Prime Minister Wan Chunqing of Jiaoji knew that it was not that the king did not hear it clearly, but that he did not want to believe it. He had no choice but to repeat the incident of Qing city being conquered. This time, Lily heard it clearly. His brain was working at high speed, and his eyeballs were moving in fear. After a while, he asked, "Have you found out who did it?" "Your Majesty, we have not found out. However, I think it has a lot to do with the mercenaries," Wan Chunqing guessed. Mercenaries? Weren't they surrounded by Wang Gengwang and Qin Heijin? Where did they find the troops to attack Chuyi City? Lily shook his head as he spoke. Obviously, he did not believe that the mercenaries were so powerful. Therefore, he added, could it be the Southern Ming army? After all, they thought that we killed their envoy. It is normal for them to seek revenge. Absolutely not. At this moment, Wan Chunqing said confidently. Then, he explained, Your Majesty, we have arranged our own people in the Southern Ming army. If they do anything, they will not be able to hide it from our eyes. Moreover, the Southern Ming's opponent is the king of Min Zhuang. Before this disaster is dealt with, how could they divide their troops to deal with us? Lily nodded after hearing Wan Chunqing's words. He knew that he still looked down on the mercenaries. If that was the case, it seemed that only this mysterious army could make a move on them. However, no matter how mysterious he was still a human. Lili strode to the map of the palace and stood there for a moment before he gave the order Jishu, Beibei, and Longbian cities to send troops to attack Chuyi City from different directions. Try to get rid of the invading mercenaries in the city in the shortest time possible. Also, send someone to contact Qin Heijin and Wang Gengwang. Tell them that we have discovered the main force of the mercenaries here. Tell them to advance boldly and get rid of the enemy as soon as possible. Lily might be old, but he still had a thorough understanding of the situation in Jiuji. The series of countermeasures he adopted were also very appropriate. Prime Minister Wan Chunqing, who was standing below, nodded. If he was the one making the arrangements, this was the most he could do. He immediately complied and walked out of the room. When King Lily was the only one left, his eyes flashed with anger and killing intent. Mercenaries, since you took the initiative to find trouble with me, then don't go back. Jiuji was not very big. The advantage of a small country was that things could be spread quickly. As scouts on horses left the city and headed in different directions, a net was formed to deal with the mercenaries. Beibei City. It was located on the east side of Hanoi, the capital of Jiuji. It could be said that it was the eastern gate of the capital. Since it was the eastern gate, its location was naturally very important. To be able to become the general guarding the city, he naturally had some authority. He was Pan Wenfei of the Pan family, one of the 6 great families of Jiuji. Relying on his family's prestige, Pan Wenfei obtained this position. Because of this matter, who knew how many people had talked about him behind his back? He did not know when it started, but he had secretly made up his mind to perform well. When he achieved great merit, he would use facts to slap the faces of those who dared to slander him behind his back. He would let them know that they were wrong. However, many times, having the intention was one thing, and being able to do it was another. If he wanted to achieve great merit, he had to have the opportunity. Previously, when King Lily was persuaded to send troops to the Southern Ming Empire, Pan Wenfei had fought to bring troops north. However, how could the Pan family compete with the Wan family? In the end, he failed. After returning to Beibei City, he could only continue to wait. However, although Beibei City was known as the Eastern Gate of Hanoi, the Southern Ming Empire was currently weak. It seemed that it was impossible for them to attack Jiuji's territory. He did not know where his opportunity was and if it would appear again. Chapter 480. Who was the enemy? The imperial edict did not state it clearly. However, to Pan Wenfei, none of this was important. What was important was that he could finally lead an army into battle. He had envied his elders for being able to gallop on the battlefield countless times. The moment he received the order, he gathered the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were on standby and left the city. It was not that Pan Wenfei did not want to bring more soldiers out of the city, but he could only mobilize these 2,000 men. With the mentality of going all out in battle, not a single soldier was left in the city. All of them followed him out of the city and headed straight for Chu-Yi City in the east. At the same time when Pan Wenfei left the city, the armies of Jishu and Longbian cities also began to gather rapidly and set off towards Chu-Yi City 6 hours later. The only difference was that they only brought 1,000 soldiers and left half of their soldiers to guard the city. The 3 northern cities moved, and the scouts who had been staring at them quickly reported the information to Chu-Yi City's Yang Qindong. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Yang Qindong, who was facing the 3 armies, was not afraid at all. On the contrary, he laughed out loud. Very good, especially the North Belt City General Pan Wenfei's performance. It seems like you are quite accurate in judging people, Hong Jin. Yang Qindong laughed out loud. Hong Jin, who was standing respectfully at the side, lowered his head and replied embarrassedly, I was just lucky to have guessed correctly. It is still the Duke of Loyal and Courageous who gained from strategizing. Previously, Yang Qindong had listened to Hong Jin's analysis of the characters of some of the Jiaoji generals. When he talked about Pan Wenfei, he said that this person was a person who rejoiced in grandiose achievements. He always liked to talk about strategy on paper when he had nothing to do. Because of this, many people had laughed at him. He had never been on the battlefield and thought that he could win the war by manipulating the map. What was the difference between this and deceiving oneself? However, Pan Wenfei only thought that others laughed at him out of jealousy and did not listen to advice at all. As one of the generals, Hong Jin naturally knew about this matter. He reported the matter and proposed that once he learned that Cord City was easily occupied, Pan Wenfei would play his armchair strategist. It was very likely that he would mobilize the entire army and reveal a great flaw. Yang Qindong attached great importance to Hong Jin's words. Furthermore, in his opinion, it was fine even if the information was inaccurate. To be honest, he didn't think much of the 1,200 Jiaoji soldiers. Sending out a cold front battalion or even an auxiliary battalion to deal with them would be a piece of cake. With such confidence, Yang Qindong followed Xian Hongjin's plan and arranged for Battalion Commander Chen Bo of Lingfeng to lie in ambush on the road between Beidao City and Chu-Yi City. He was only waiting for the enemy to come out in full force so that he could seize the opportunity to seize the city. Now, it seemed that this arrangement was very correct. After praising Hong Jin, Yang Qindong turned to the other officers and said, since the enemy has made their move, we should also prepare for action. Follow plan number 1 and enter the battlefield. Yes. After the officers saluted in unison, they began to get busy with their own tasks. At this moment, King Lily of Jiaoji had no idea what kind of powerful opponent they were facing this time. Even the enemy had started to move. The Jiaoji army that had been peaceful for over 20 years was now in a state of turmoil and war. The distance between Beidao City and Chu-Yi City was only about 180 li. Even if the road was uneven and they had to take a detour, it was only about 200 li. In Pan Wenfei's opinion, this distance could be covered in 3 days. In terms of leg strength, the Ming army was more than twice as fast as the Jiaoji army. Perhaps it was because they had lived in the mountains since young, many of them had trained their feet to be as sturdy as iron. Even if they were only wearing cloth shoes, their walking speed was still not slow. They could cover about 70 li in a day. In addition, the weather was perfect. It was still drizzling a while ago, but in the past 2 days, the weather had completely cleared up. The weather was so good, the roads were drier, and the army moved faster and faster. All of this created an illusion for Pan Wenfei that this was the will of the heavens, allowing him to reach Chu-Yi City faster and achieve the first military victory. The speed of Bei Feng's army was already very fast. However, compared to the 2 battalions led by Battalion Commander Chen Bo and the 2 auxiliary battalions, it was still much slower. Once there was no battle, the Leng Feng's usual training was 10 kilometers in the morning and 10 kilometers in the morning. If the weather was good in the afternoon, they would even do a 5 kilometers warm-up. Under such high-intensity training, no one could compare to him in terms of speed. To the Leng Feng, it was normal for them to cover a distance of 100 kilometers in a day. If the situation was urgent, they could move even faster. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. They did not understand the mercenaries at all. They did not even dare to confirm whether the ones who took down Qi city were mercenaries. The fate of the Jiaoji army seemed to have been decided. Needless to say, Beatty City had already been taken down by Yang Qindong. How could their defeat not be decided? Just like now, when the sky darkened, Chen Bo led his 3 battalions of Yang family army to quietly pass by the other side of the mountain range. This kind of irregular movement left Pan Wenfei completely in the dark. He didn't know that his old nest, Beidai City, was about to face the consequence of changing its surname, and he was destined to become a lone army, an army that would never return. In Chuyi City, Yang Qindong was having dinner with 2,000 Han people. The trial conference had ended yesterday. Those who had mistreated the Han people in Chuyi City in the past, regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, had all received their due retribution. This left Chuyi City, which originally had a population of 30,000, with only 25,000 people left. A total of 2,000 people were killed and 3,000 were sentenced to death. The entire city was filled with the smell of blood. Even the number of Jiaoji citizens walking on the streets had decreased significantly. Even though the number of people had decreased, the atmosphere in the city had become better. The evil people had all been killed, leaving only the kind-hearted ones. When they met, they would nod their heads to show their friendliness, which lessened the killing intent. In particular, the Yang clan army had never bullied anyone. As long as one abided by the law, even if one bumped into them on the streets, they would not interfere with one another. This made the remaining 20,000 Jiaoji citizens feel much more at ease. In addition, Yang Qindong had ordered the Yang clan army to open up the treasury of Chuyi City and distribute the stored food to the citizens on time. This solved the problem of their food supply, and the atmosphere in the city became much more harmonious. Speaking of which, Jiaoji used to be a subordinate of the Great Ming Dynasty, so the citizens did not have a strong sense of conflict. In addition, Yang Qindong had the intention of running this place well. In just 2 days, the security in the city had improved. Setting himself as an example, Yang Qindong would come to eat with the Han people whenever it was time to eat. Under the influence of the good atmosphere, not only did the Han people feel warm, even some of the more daring citizens of Jiaoji dared to come over and take a look at the young demon king who had killed people without batting an eyelid 2 days ago. Tonight, Yang Qindong came to the square to eat with the Han people again, deepening the relationship between both parties. In fact, since yesterday, there were no more than 2,000 Han people gathered here. Under the busy work of Kong Jia and Song Zhe, the 2 political commissars, the houses of the Jiaoji villains who had been killed were vacated for the Han people to live in and use. This allowed more Han people to be allocated their own houses. It was said that once the situation stabilized, the city gates could be opened to the outside world, and land would be distributed to everyone. This gave all the Han people hope. Since ancient times, land was the foundation of the people. As long as they had land, they could grow food, obtain a good harvest, and live on. It was precisely because Yang Qindong was considerate of them and gave them dignity that the Han people liked this young master. Even though many of them had already been allocated their own houses, when it was time to eat, they would still rush to the square to eat and chat with the young master who brought them hope. Facing these people, Yang Qindong did not put on any airs. Instead, he squatted down and ate with everyone. After eating, he sat cross-legged on the ground and chatted with everyone. As for the content of the chat, there was a variety of topics. Since he did not put on any airs and was so amiable, it allowed him to quickly get closer to the people. Following that, when Yang Qindong talked about some matters and policies, he would receive a positive response from the people. After 2 days of interaction, the Han people also knew that this young master was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty. It seemed that he had a lot to say. After some of the bolder ones finished eating, they asked tentatively, "Duke, you guys have taken down Chu Yi. Presumably, that old fellow Li Li will not accept it. Will they take revenge here?" Just from the way they addressed him, it could be seen how much the Han people living in Jiaoji hated Li Li. Of course, This was also because they had their own dignity after interacting with Yang Qindong and the others for a few days. If it was in the past, they would definitely not dare to say such words. Yes, yes. When this issue was raised, many people's faces changed. It was not easy to have their own dignity and hope for the future. They did not want everything to disappear so quickly. Seeing that everyone was so worried, Yang Qindong smiled. He knew that it was time to reassure everyone. Didn't you all say that Li Li is an old man? Since he is already old, how can he be our opponent? Moreover, it's not like you haven't seen how powerful our army is. Other than the fact that we have fewer people now, our combat power is very strong. Don't worry, unless the enemy doesn't come, no matter how many come, we will destroy them all. When the war starts, if you are interested, you can go up the city tower and see for yourself. Other people might be in danger guarding the city, but we don't have to. Chapter 481. When they heard that they could go up the city gate tower to watch the battle, some of them became excited. However, when they thought that war was not so fun, they wanted to retreat. However, when they saw Yang Qindong's confident look, they did not feel that afraid anymore. It seemed that they could go up the city gate tower to watch the battle. Looking at the hesitant expressions of these people, Yang Qindong sighed in his heart. The revolution had not succeeded yet. Comrades, you still have to work hard. These Han people had been oppressed for too long. If he wanted them to regain their confidence and become the master of Jiaoji, he would need a lot of time and many things to do. However, since he was here, he had to succeed. Otherwise, if he could not even handle a small Jiaoji, how could he talk about giving the Han people dignity and happiness? How could he talk about conquering the world? Another night passed. The Han people in Qing city slept very well. They were slowly getting used to this feeling. It was also night time, but some people did not get any rest. They were the reinforcements from the north, Jishu, and Longbian cities. Since the king had given the order, they had to carry it out. In terms of execution, the Jiaoji army was better than the Ming army. Perhaps it was because the Ming army had been split into two. Seeing that it was going to be split into three, the generals had long changed their minds. They were no longer as happy to carry out the orders of their superiors. The speed of the Jiaoji army was not slow, especially in the middle. They had the most soldiers and the highest morale. Under the leadership of General Pan Wenfei, they wanted to achieve the greatest merit. They were the first to set off and were now less than 10 li away from Qing city. Seeing that the target was right in front of him, Pan Wenfei had a bold idea in his heart. Could he take advantage of the night to attack? If that was the case, he would be able to take down Qing city before the other reinforcements arrived. That would be the greatest merit. Once this idea appeared in his mind, he could not get rid of it. Pan Wenfei, who was stimulated by the military merit, quickly made a decision. He then ordered the army to start resting. Everyone, eat first and rest well. After 4 hours, we will begin the siege. At that time, all the credit will belong to us brothers. As Pan Wenfei rode his horse through the army, he explained his plan. The 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers were extremely excited. They didn't know how powerful Yang Xie's new army was. They had been staying in Beidai city for a long time, and they thought that they were the strongest soldiers in the world. Under such a mindset, one really dared to think of anything and do anything. However, one never considered whether one had such a big appetite and could do such an important thing. The scouts who had been keeping an eye on the soldiers in the north suddenly realized that they had stopped moving. They were still 10 li away from Qing city. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case. If it were them, they would at least stop at a distance of 5 miles from the city gate to rest and reorganize. This way, they would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort when attacking the city tomorrow morning. Realizing that something was amiss, the scout squad leader sent a soldier back to the city to report. They couldn't tell what these people were up to, but the 6th young master should be able to tell. In their hearts, they had already deified the sixth young master and thought that he was a god sent down by the heavens. Otherwise, how could they explain the powerful firearms in their hands? They stopped 10 li away and haven't set up camp. In Qi City, Yang Qindong's expression revealed a look of understanding after hearing the scout's report. After all, he had attended a military academy in the future and had studied countless battles since ancient times. He was already familiar with some of the tactics of his predecessors. Compared to the various three-dimensional battle tactics of the future, the battles of ancient times were sometimes like child's play. How could Pan Wenfei's little plan escape his eyes? Hee, they want to copy us and launch a night attack. Very good, since that's the case, don't let them go back. A mature battle plan flashed through Yang Qindong's mind. Originally, Yang Qindong didn't have the idea of swallowing Pan Wenfei's troops, but he did have the intention of severely injuring them. Compared to other people who were afraid that their strength would be exposed in front of others, Yang Qindong did the opposite. He hoped that others would know how powerful he was so that when they fought, it would be twice the result with half the effort. Before they met the enemy, they would already have a 30% advantage in terms of momentum. With this thought, Yang Qindong needed someone to spread the news of the bravery of the Yang family army. Originally, this candidate was Pan Wenfei. It was very simple to achieve this goal. He only needed to severely injure the opponent. The opponent who was scared out of his wits would surely spread the news for him. However, he didn't expect that Pan Wenfei would actually think of launching a night attack. This attitude of not putting the Yang family army in his eyes made Yang Qindong angry, but he also decided to take him down. Since he didn't even have the ability to see this, there was no need for such a general to continue living. As for the matter of spreading the news, it was very simple. Didn't Jishu and Longbian City have a total of 2,000 troops? He just needed to let them spread the news for him. These were the warriors that were carefully selected from the 2,000 people. They were more agile than ordinary soldiers. Once these people climbed up the city tower, it was basically a done deal for them to take down the city. After the elite group of 100 people set off, Pan Wenfei and the rest did not stay idle. The remaining 1,900 people quickly approached the bottom of Qi City Tower. They were making their final preparations. Once the city gates opened from the inside, they would immediately kill their way into the city and display their bravery and grace. For a moment, Qi City, which was originally shrouded in darkness, had black shadows moving continuously on top and bottom of the city walls. It was as though a large army was pressing down on the city. Creak. Just as the soldiers climbing the city tower and Bei Feng's troops were moving towards their target, the originally tightly shut west city gates suddenly opened from the inside. The sound of the heavy city gate opening was extremely shocking in the dark night. What's going on? The sudden change caused Bei Feng's troops to stop in their tracks. The soldiers looked at the Dakarches looked at the Centurions looked at the Kiliarchs, and the Kiliarchs' gaze naturally landed on the dumbfounded General Pan Wenfei. At this moment, Pan Wenfei was also at a loss. He did not understand why the city tower opened on its own so quickly. Because of this, he said without any principles, is it because the enemy knows that we are here and knows that they can't defeat us, so they are opening the city gates and surrendering? Even the stupidest person would not believe this sentence. They did not know whether to laugh or cry at General Pan Wenfei's overly good self-suggestion. Charge! Just as the general and the soldiers' faces were sluggish, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from the originally pitch-black gate. After that, countless figures leaped out of the city gate like fish. 1, 2. There were countless of them. At this moment, there was no need for Pan Wenfei to say anything. Everyone understood what was going on. This was not because the enemy was afraid of them and had surrendered. They were already prepared and were about to charge out. Pan Wenfei, who was leading troops for the first time, was indeed shocked by the scene in front of him. In the past, when he was an armchair strategist, the things he did and his predictions were all wishful thinking. For example, in his imagination, when two armies were fighting, they would listen to him. Whoever he wanted to win would win. How could there be such an unexpected event like this happening before his eyes? They also became the first targets of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. The crossbow bolts did not have eyes. In order to perform meritorious deeds, the temporary auxiliary soldiers did not care if they were facing ordinary soldiers or high and mighty generals. They only knew one thing, and that was to kill. If they killed someone, they could take the head and claim the credit. With meritorious deeds, they would have the opportunity to become an auxiliary soldier. If they could even become a cold vanguard, that would be even better. The temporary auxiliary soldiers were eager to perform meritorious deeds. Arrows rained down like rain. Poor General Pan Wenfei, who couldn't run anymore, turned around and held his sword, ready to fight. But soon, his pupils began to dilate, and he fell to the ground like a hedgehog. Until the moment he was shot to death, he still could not understand. He still could not face the moment before his eyes. After all, everything happened too quickly. It was so fast that it was easy to think that it was a dream. Pan Wenfei died, followed by the Kiliarchs and Centurions. Then, a large number of Northern Army soldiers were caught and shot to death. Only a few of them reacted quickly. They squatted on the ground and shouted to surrender. Only then did they avoid death. A total of 2,000 Northern Army soldiers. In less than 2 hours, the battle was completely over. After counting, not a single one of the 2,000 soldiers managed to escape. This showed how much the temporary auxiliary soldiers wanted to perform meritorious deeds. From the mouths of the captured soldiers, they found Pan Wenfei, whose body was full of crossbow bolts. When Hung Jin saw this scene, he was so frightened that he sucked in a breath of cold air. After witnessing the power of the mercenaries once again, he finally understood why he lost so miserably. Compared to the powerful Jiaoji army in the eyes of others, the Jiaoji army was nothing but a man-eating wolf. In front of the mercenary tiger army, the Jiaoji army was nothing. Pan Wenfei was eager to perform meritorious deeds and had already revealed too many flaws. Even if the two armies were to fight head-on, there would be no chance of victory. In front of the mercenaries, who had strong morale, strong fighting spirit, advanced weapons, strict military discipline, and elite qualities, there was no army in the world that could be their opponent. There were probably very few who were qualified to be their opponent. Not only Hung Jin, but the civilians on the city gate tower were also completely shocked when they saw this scene. Although most of them had not experienced war, this term was only what they imagined it to be. However, they had heard from the older generation that war was either a matter of life and death. As the saying went, a general's success was built on the bones of thousands. Victory had always been hard to come by. It required the blood and bones of countless people to accumulate. How could it be as simple as what they saw? One group of people kept charging and the other group kept retreating. How could it be as simple as what they saw? One group of people kept charging and the other group kept retreating. The Han civilians of Jiaoji witnessed the heroic performance of the mercenaries on the battlefield. While they were sighing at how easy it was to win, their hearts were filled with boundless admiration and respect for this army. None of the 2,000 enemies managed to escape. None of the auxiliary soldiers who charged out were killed. Only a few of them suffered from varying degrees of injuries. This kind of result that could be considered as a complete victory shocked the 2,000 Han civilians of Qing City. It filled them with confidence for their beautiful future. At the same time, some of the Jiaoji citizens who originally had other thoughts also began to give up at this moment, putting away all of their negative thoughts. Hurry up and clean up the battlefield. Set up the Jingguan. Seize the time to rest. There are still enemies coming at dawn. The shouts of the officers rang out continuously below the city gate. Then, groups of mercenaries shuttled back and forth busily. The Jingguan was an ancient burial mound used to flaunt one's martial arts and gather the corpses of the enemies. The reason why Yang Qindong wanted to set up the Jingguan was naturally because he wanted to create a better deterrent effect. If possible, he did not want to target the ordinary Jiaoji civilians and soldiers. What he wanted was the lives of the few people who held the highest positions. He wanted the lives of the foreign races who were hostile to the Han people. If he wanted to rule over this place, he would need the support of a large population. If he killed all of them, this place would become a piece of scorched earth. This was not the result he wanted to see. The night passed in such a bustling manner. The next morning, a jingguan with close to 2,000 men was set up and placed 5 li away from the west gate of Qi city. The reinforcements from Jishu and Longbian arrived at this place after daybreak. This was what they saw. The tall jingguan suddenly appeared in their field of vision, causing the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers to stop in their tracks. When the scouts they sent out reported that the corpse of General Pan Wenfei was hanging on the city gate tower of Qi city, they finally knew the origin of this jingguan. Chapter 483. Based on the information they received, Pan Wenfei's troops from the north had only arrived 10 hours earlier than them. How could they have been wiped out in such a short period of time? If that was the case, what kind of terrifying enemy were they facing? While the 2 reinforcements were analyzing the situation, the 6 auxiliary battalions left the city after a good night's sleep. After yesterday's victory, Yang Qindong intended to increase the combat strength of the auxiliary soldiers. This time, he did not send out the most elite Leng Feng. However, even with 3 auxiliary battalions in each direction, there were only a little more than 1,000 men. They were far from a match for the 2 Jiaoji reinforcements. When the 3 auxiliary battalions suddenly appeared in each direction, the 2,000 reinforcements sent by Jishu city and Longbian city resisted for a while. When they discovered that the advanced firearms in the auxiliary battalion's hands could cause a large area of long-range damage to them without waiting for them to engage the enemy, they finally understood the strength of their opponents when they saw the soldiers in the front line falling to the ground one by one with the sound of gunfire. With such powerful firearms that could take their lives from 300 to 400 meters away, such an opponent was truly terrifying. Run! Without any exciting close combat, the 2,000 Jiaoji reinforcements turned around and fled. Along the way, they left behind about 700 corpses. This was because they escaped quickly enough. If they really fought to the death, these 2,000 men would face the danger of being completely wiped out. The scale of the jingguan became even larger. Although the jingguan seemed extremely terrifying, the citizens of Qi city felt exceptionally peaceful. With the protection of such a powerful army, they could finally put aside their worries about the Jiaoji army's revenge. Although the 2 consecutive battles were not intense, the results were gratifying. After the 2 battles, Yang Qindong made the decision to go deeper into the inner region of Jiaoji. In order to protect the citizens of Qi city that had already been conquered and to better consolidate the hearts of the people, the political commissar of the auxiliary battalion, Song Zhe, was left behind. The mission Yang Qindong gave him was to persuade the Han and Jiaoji citizens as quickly as possible. The day Jiaoji was conquered would be the day they would be put to use. At the same time, 2 auxiliary battalions and 2 temporary auxiliary battalions were left behind. With this military strength, it would be enough to defend the city even if the enemy was several times stronger. After arranging everything in the city, Yang Qindong brought the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment, the 6 battalions of the Auxiliary Army, and the 14 battalions of the Auxiliary Army, a total of over 7,000 people, and headed towards Beidai City in the direction that Pan Wenfei had come from. At this moment, Qi City, which was facing Qi City, had already changed hands. When Battalion Commander Chen Bo of the Cold Front brought the 2nd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions to Qi City, which was still open, the unguarded Qi City was swallowed up in an instant. Of the 40,000 citizens in the city, less than 2,000 managed to escape. The remaining 38,000 people, including the 3,000 Han, were all locked up in the city. Chen Bo's appearance was like a heavenly soldier descending from the heavens, causing the commoners in the city to close their doors. Everyone's expression changed. The originally bustling city instantly became much emptier, as if it was a dead city, cold and cheerless. Chen Bo did not choose to search every house like he did in Qi City. Instead, he first sent a battalion of auxiliary soldiers to occupy the city towers and a company of soldiers to guard every gate. Then, he sent men to seal the treasury of Qi city, obtaining large amounts of food and a small amount of gold and silver. With sufficient food, Chen Bo ordered the remaining battalion of auxiliary soldiers to patrol the streets, maintaining the security of the city. The remaining Cold Front Battalion became a mobile force, preventing any large-scale mutiny from occurring in the city. This was something that could not be helped. He only had 12 companies of 1,200 men, and to maintain the security of a city of 40,000 people, coupled with the fact that he was a newcomer, he had to be wary of any enemies that might appear at any time. His military strength was truly lacking. If not for the fact that he knew that the sixth young master would be arriving soon, he would have already thought of leaving after robbing the treasury. The 2,000 citizens of Jiaoji who had escaped quickly spread the news of the fall of Qi city. 200 li behind them was the capital of Jiaoji, Haniai city. When the news reached there, it caused chaos in the city. If not for the protection of the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers stationed here, no one knew what would have happened. Jiaoji Palace. King Lili also received the news. His face was filled with disbelief, but at the same time, he was confused. It wasn't just King Lili who couldn't figure it out. Even the officials who had been urgently summoned couldn't figure it out. How could Beidao City change hands without any warning? Why was there not even a basic warning or resistance? What was the defending general, Pan Wenfei, doing? Fortunately, Prime Minister Wan Chunqing, who arrived at the end, gave an answer. He said that Pan Wenfei was eager to gain merit, and took all the soldiers in Qi city to attack. At this time, the news of the Qi city being placed in the capital had not yet spread. Naturally, no one knew whether Pan Wenfei was dead or alive. However, losing Beidai city was a fact. Just based on this, King Lili, who was sitting high above, vented his anger and said, Pan Wenfei is an idiot. He only knows how to attack and not defend. He is an idiot. Once the war is over, demote him to the rank of Chiliarch. Old Lili, who was in his 60s, demoted Pan Wenfei before hearing the results of Qi city. If General Pan Wenfei knew about this, who knew how he would feel? However, since Qi city had changed hands, there was no point in punishing Pan Wenfei. What they needed to do now was to take back Qi city. Otherwise, it would become an existence that could threaten Hanoi city at any time. Who is willing to lead troops to solve the problem of Qi city? His gaze that was like that of a tiger king scanned the hall of the palace, especially the few generals. Lili asked in a low voice. I am willing. Just as he finished speaking, a 7-foot-tall middle-aged man stood out. This person's gaze was like a pillar. Just standing there, he naturally gave off an intimidating aura. He was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai was the 4th largest surname in Jiaoji and had a lot of influence in the country. The main reason why he could be called a famous general was because of the conflicts between Jiaoji and the Lansang kingdom, which was today's Laos. He played a big role in it. He led troops to fight against the Lansang army 3 times and won all 3 times. That was why he was called a famous general. Fan Yuhai being able to take the initiative to stand up made King Lili very happy. However, he didn't agree to such a request. In his opinion, the enemy was unknown, and they didn't even know their numbers. The only thing they knew was that they were mercenaries. Under such circumstances, if they sent out a famous general and lost, the morale of the entire country's army would be greatly shaken. Not agreeing to Fan Yuhai's request, Li Li's gaze landed on another general called Huang Hua. In comparison, this person was shorter. However, he had led troops to fight against the Lansang army. Although he did not have any outstanding achievements, he had been on the battlefield and seen blood. General Huang Hua, this king orders you to lead 5,000 troops to Beidao city. Are you willing to accept the order? Although it was a question, anyone could tell that if Huang Hua dared to disagree, he would not have a good time. This subject is willing to accept the order. How could Huang Hua not see the king's intention? Although he himself was not willing to accept this task, since he was named, he already had no other choice. Very good. You can lead the troops with peace of mind. According to the reports, the number of mercenaries is less than 10,000. The Liangshan region should be their main force. You shouldn't have to face many enemies. Li Li comforted Huang Hua. After speaking, he looked at Prime Minister Wan Chunqing and said, "Send someone to tell Chen Heijin and General Wan Gengwang to end the battle quickly and show the might of Zhaoxi's army." This subject understands. Wan Chunqing bowed. He could tell that the king was unhappy. He decided to immediately send someone to find Wan Gengwang and tell him to perform well. Otherwise, the Ruan family would not be able to get any benefits. In the vast and boundless Lang Mountain, the scene of a chaotic pursuit was playing out. Wan Gengwang led 30,000 troops, and Chen Heijin also led 30,000 troops. They were only facing Wu Xing's Cold Front Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions, totaling 1,200 people. 60,000 against 1,200, with a ratio of 50 to 1, the result seemed to be set in stone. However, the truth was the opposite. In the 10 days of pursuit, the Zhaoxi army, which had the advantage in numbers, suffered heavy losses. The Cold Front Battalion had gone through special training in the rainforest. When they separated from Yang Qindong's main force, they had obtained a large amount of ammunition. Especially the number of landmines, each of them had 10 of them. In addition, Wu Sheng, as the leader, had given his subordinates the authority to attack in groups. Each group would be split into 2 groups. The squad leader and assistant squad leader would each lead a group. This meant that there were 240 units. Just think about it. In the process of pursuit, they had to face the attacks of 200 units at any time. No one would be able to stand it. It was just like in the rainforest. No one knew when there would be a loud explosion. Needless to say, this was caused by the Zhaoxi soldiers behind them stepping on a landmine. If one could not understand the secret signal between the Cold Front Battalion, they would not know where the landmines were. In the rainforest, the terrain was steep and complicated. Everywhere could be a good place to set up a landmine. In addition, the scattered Cold Front Battalion would occasionally launch a sneak attack. It was easy to imagine the situation of the Zhaoxi army. Chapter 484. In front of a low-lying ditch, there were 5 Lungfeng brothers lying in ambush around it. The trench was naturally formed. After years of being watered by the rain, soil erosion was severe, causing the water in the trench to be knee-deep. An invisible landmine was buried under the trench. The reason why the landmine was buried here was because the area was surrounded by large trees. In comparison, only this low-lying area was suitable for humans to walk through. During their training in the rainforest some time ago, Yang Qindong had mentioned that such a place was often the only way for humans to travel. The 5 Ling Feng brothers surrounded the trench. There was 1 person on each of the 2 large trees on the left and right. They looked down from above. Not only could they kill the enemy from above, they could also act as sentries. 2 Ling Feng warriors were also hiding in the bushes on the left and right of the trench. They were in charge of catching the fish that might have fallen into the net after passing through the trench. The last person was the leader, the squad leader of the 5. He was in charge of maneuvering. He was in charge of luring the enemy and retreating. Do not underestimate the task of luring the enemy. He could only lure a large number of enemies if he did it well. On the other hand, no matter how good the trap was, it would only be a beautiful decoration if no one fell for it. Squad leader, there are enemies 200 meters to the southeast. Squad leader Ling Feng, who was leaning against a large tree and chewing on a fresh leaf, heard his comrades shout. 15 minutes ago, this squad leader had lured a Zhaoxi corporal out. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he killed all 5 enemies near the puddle. Then, he dragged the bodies of the dead enemies to the bushes to hide them. After doing all this, the squad leader wanted to rest and recover his strength, but he heard his comrades' warning. The enemy was in order. The squad leader, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Like a venomous snake that had spotted its prey, he arched his body and shot out. Naturally, the direction was southeast. He wanted to lure the enemy over and eliminate them without leaving a trace. With Leng Feng's spear skills, even in an open battle, the Jiaoji army would not be a match for him. However, in this dense forest, there were no logistical supplies. The ammunition that the soldiers brought with them was depleted. In order to complete the glorious mission that the sixth young master had entrusted to them, they needed to conserve their strength as much as possible. In that case, how to lure the enemy in front of them and hunt them down would become a test of their abilities. The squad leader shot out like a catapult. In just a few breaths, he appeared in the southeast direction. Since he had no intention of hiding himself, he was seen clearly by a squad leader of the Jiaoji army not far away. "There's an enemy over there. Follow me, quick." He had been in the rainforest for a long time. From time to time, he could hear explosions and gunshots in the distance, but he had never seen an enemy. This inevitably made Shin Chang feel like he was dealing with ghosts. Now that he finally saw a living opponent, how could he let him go? After a loud shout, the 9 soldiers behind him followed him and chased in the direction where Leng Feng had disappeared. On top of the 2 giant trees, the 2 Leng Feng soldiers who had seen the movements of the Jiaoji army made a hand signal to their comrades below the trees. After informing them that there were 10 enemies, they raised their 95 style and stared at the 2 people in front and behind the enemy. It was impossible to keep an eye on 10 people with 2 guns. However, as long as they kept an eye on the head and the tail, the enemy would not be able to escape. This was common knowledge that they had to master during their training. Due to the appearance of Yang Chendong, the experience gained by countless predecessors in the future had become knowledge that was stored in the minds of the Leng Feng soldiers. The squad leader, who had no idea that he was being targeted, was so excited that he wanted to catch his opponent. He yelled as he led his 9 brothers to chase after squad leader Leng Feng. Under Leng Feng's intentional bait, the distance between the 2 parties was maintained within 50 meters. At such a distance, the enemy would not lose sight of them and would not be able to hurt them with arrows. One had to know that in this environment where there were tall trees and bushes everywhere, sometimes even a bullet would miss, let alone an ordinary bough. As expected, after shooting a few arrows consecutively without hitting the target, the squad leader decisively ordered the soldiers to stop shooting and focus on their legs. They had to speed up and catch up with the enemy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. As one of the black soldiers under General Qin Jinhe, the 10 of them were considered the cream of the crop in the Jiaoji army. Just like in the rainforest, they were able to run as fast as they could. It was not much different from running on the open ground. Elites naturally had the confidence of elites. It was because of this confidence that they did not give up on chasing after the enemy even though they knew that something was wrong. This was how the truly powerful were. They were not afraid of any schemes and machinations with their valiant strength. The enemy's speed was very fast. Leng Feng, who was leading the way, had no choice but to use all his strength to leave them behind. When he arrived at the puddle, he jumped over the puddle and ran to the other side to hide. Just as Leng Feng's figure disappeared, the black soldiers caught up with him. The squad leader who was running at the front leaped into the air without hesitation when he saw the puddle in front of him. He followed squad leader Leng Feng's example and leaped over the puddle before continuing to run forward. After the 10-man squad leader leaped into the air, the other 2 black soldiers also leaped into the air and leaped over the 2.5-meter-tall puddle. The Cold Blade warriors who were hiding on top of the trees saw all of this and could not help but feel a little anxious. If these black soldiers could really jump over the puddle, wouldn't it mean that the ambush in the puddle would be useless? Thinking of this, one of the Cold Vanguard soldiers lowered the muzzle of his gun. He was ready to fire. Although the hit rate of this kind of high-speed enemy was a little low, and it was easy to expose his position, he couldn't care less at this time. Just as the Leng Feng soldiers were about to fire to see if they could hit the black soldiers and trigger the landmine in the puddle, another black soldier jumped up. However, perhaps because he had used up too much of his stamina, his leap was short and his left foot landed in the puddle. It was this unintentional carelessness that brought about a fatal result. A column of water suddenly rushed out from the puddle, followed by a deafening roar. The landmines in the puddles were triggered, and the powerful explosive force of the gunpowder directly sent the 4 black soldiers who were closest to the puddles flying. The powerful explosion caused the black soldiers to involuntarily pause. At this moment, 4 gunshots rang out. The 5 soldiers, including Captain Leng Feng, each fired a shot, and all of them hit their targets. 4 of them were killed in the explosion and 5 were shot dead. In a short period of time, the squad leader was the only one left out of the 10 black soldiers. This squad leader was also impressive. He did not have the slightest intention of running away when he saw that all his brothers were dead. On the contrary, he noticed that the squad leader had exposed his identity by firing a shot. Then, he pounced on him like a ferocious tiger. After killing a black soldier, the squad leader did not have time to turn his gun around when he sensed a black shadow approaching him quickly. Instinctively, the Leng Feng soldier rolled to the side. Thanks to this roll, the long saber that was descending from the sky missed its mark and left a deep saber mark on the ground. The squad leader quickly rolled away after missing his shot. He rushed toward the squad leader, Leng Feng, who was still standing up. The long saber in his hand was like a blender. It seemed like he wanted to perish together with the squad leader. The squad leader, Leng Feng, had just stood up from the ground. His body was unstable and the muzzle of his gun was not fully adjusted. His instincts told him that he might not be able to hit the target if he fired the shot. He might even be injured by the opponent's long saber if he wasted time. Helplessly, he could only continue to lean back and roll backward. The squad leader's reaction was somewhat out of the squad leader's expectation. After knowing that his opponent was strong, he felt the existence of danger. Since his first and second shots did not hit the target, he wanted to find a place to hide. What happened just now told him that his opponent had reinforcements nearby and he was fighting alone. The thought of hiding flashed across his mind. Just as the squad leader was about to dive into the bushes at the side, a gunshot was heard. The squad leader's body swayed a little before he fell to the ground with a plop. Some water droplets splashed when his body hit the ground. The shot was fired by a squad leader who was hiding in a giant tree. He felt that his opponent was trying to escape, so he fired without hesitation. He did not have much confidence at first, but now it seemed that he was lucky. After the gunshot, Leng Feng adjusted his posture and dashed over. The dagger in his hand flashed and plunged into the chest of the black squad leader who had fallen to the ground. Finishing off the enemy was one of the compulsory courses for the squad leaders. When Yang Qindong was training for this course, he once said that they should never take any chances and should not be too confident in themselves. Since ancient times, countless talented people had died because they underestimated their opponents. Therefore, regardless of whether the opponent was really dead or not, they should give the finishing blow if they could. If they couldn't, they should give the finishing blow. They should never let the enemy go just because they wanted to save energy. Otherwise, it would be the greatest crime and irresponsibility to their comrades. Chapter 485. After the last stab, the black soldier's body trembled again. It was a normal reaction before death. After sensing that the target was dead, Leng Feng gave a thumbs up to the Leng Feng on the tree, praising the beauty and brilliance of the shot. Then, he turned to the other 4 comrades and said, "Clean up the battlefield and prepare to retreat to the next ambush location. Also, leave a landmine under the enemy's corpse. Also, leave a mark to alert other comrades who might be passing by." Following Captain Leng Feng's words, except for one warrior on the tree who was responsible for keeping watch, the other 3 came to the ground and began to clean up. After 15 minutes, the battlefield was cleaned up and the landmines were planted. Then, the 5 of them left quietly to complete the next ambush mission. Scenes like this were happening all the time in the dense forests of Langsun. More than 200 small teams were constantly completing missions like this. And once they killed a group of enemies, it would be time for them to reap a harvest. For example, the rations that the enemy had on them would become their supplies. It was true that if there was no food or water, the enemy would give them to us. With more than 200 squads, even if each squad only killed 10 people a day, the Jiaoji army would lose 2,000 men, not to mention that some squads could kill 3 or even 4 squads a day. In just 5 days, the Jiaoji army had already lost more than 15,000 men. There would always be small groups that would mysteriously lose contact with them. When this news reached the ears of General Wang Gengwang and Chen Heijin, it made them very frustrated. Even worse, the king had given an order. He mentioned that Qi city and Beidai city had both fallen. Based on the situation there, the king believed that there would not be many mercenaries in Langsun. He requested them to quickly end the battle here and return to Hanoi city to reinforce it. How can we possibly return to reinforce it? The Tan Chen Heijin slammed his palm on the wooden table in the temporary camp. His originally tanned face looked even scarier due to his anger. It was no wonder that Chen Heijin was so angry. Ever since he started leading the army, he had never fought a battle like this. They couldn't even see where the enemy was. At least 5,000 of their soldiers had died. This feeling of not being able to touch or hit the enemy was the most infuriating. Chen Heijin neither objected nor agreed with the king's order that there would not be too many enemies. However, he supported the idea of returning to Hanoi city to reinforce the city. As the saying goes, when an expert shows his hand, one will know whether or not he is an expert. Regardless of the number of enemies in the rainforest, at least their combat power was astonishing. From the start of the battle until now, his subordinates did not even bring back a single enemy's corpse. Just based on this, he did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. How could he dare to attack crazily? Pass down the order. Pull back the troops and move towards Hanoi city, Chen Heijin said to his deputy with a serious face. General, the king wants us to finish off our opponents quickly before returning to reinforce them. The deputy general beside him thought that he had misheard the military order and reminded him softly. Of course this general knows. But in such an environment, how can we find our opponents and fight them? It's better to retreat immediately and find a spacious place. When that time comes, these people will have to come out. Chen Heijin looked forward with a deep gaze. He had always thought that his black soldiers were the kings of the rainforest. However, after encountering an opponent stronger than himself, he realized how useless it would be to continue fighting like this. Instead of being constantly weakened, it was better to withdraw from here and look for another opportunity. Oh right, inform all the soldiers to not be too anxious when retreating. All the troops must be close to each other to prevent giving the enemy any chance to attack. Chen Heijin did not dare to underestimate the enemy in front of him. Even when retreating, he was still cautious. Unlike Chen Heijin, Wang Gengwang immediately made the decision to withdraw from the rainforest and go to Hanoi city for the sake of his family's development after receiving the secret order from the Prime Minister. In order to achieve this goal in a shorter period of time, he made the decision to allow each army to retreat on their own. From his point of view, since he had already decided not to fight, the mercenaries would not be so stubborn as to not let him go. Because Wang Gengwang's order to retreat was very urgent, many of the troops scattered outside did not have time to retreat. However, he did not consider this. According to the Prime Minister's secret letter, returning to Hanoi as soon as possible was the most important thing. Everything else could be put aside for now. Leading the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers, they quickly advanced through the rainforest of Mount Liang. This kind of military operation caught the cold vanguard army off guard. When Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, who was leading the team, heard the news from the scout, he was still in a daze. Battalion Commander, it must be because the 6th young Master Sun Bian gave them too much pressure. These people can't take care of us. Yes, Battalion Commander. This is a great opportunity for us. We can use this opportunity to gather our troops and launch a counterattack. The two company commanders of the Cold Vanguard Army expressed their thoughts. Wu Xing's eyes lit up when he heard these words. That's right. Such a desperate retreat will definitely leave behind many openings. Even though the Cold Vanguard Army had been wearing down the Jiaoji Army's forces, they had been searching for opportunities while defending or fleeing. They wanted to launch a frontal attack, but the difference in numbers was too great. Based on Yang Qindong's idea of paying the greatest price with the smallest price, Wu Sheng had never made up his mind to launch a large-scale counterattack. However, things were different now. Wang Gengwang's sudden retreat must not only have caught them off guard, but also the Jiaoji army that he led. The various armies did not retreat at the same time. This caused some of the Jiaoji soldiers to stand out from the rest. How many troops can we immediately contact? Wu Xing immediately made up his mind and began to prepare for the attack. Hearing Wu Xing ask such a question, the two company commanders beside him shuddered and said excitedly, "Battalion commander, we have a total of 1 battalion and 2 companies, a total of 600 people. If we launch an attack in an emergency, we can gather 500 men." 500 men. In the end, it's still too little. Wu Xing said with a sigh. This time, Yang Qindong had only given him 3 battalions to lure the enemy. Only one of them was the Cold Vanguard Battalion, while the other 2 were auxiliary battalions. In order to complete the mission better, he had split the 3 battalions into 2 groups, harassing Wang Gengwang's and Chen Heijin's forces. If not for the limited number of soldiers, he would have launched a large-scale counterattack long ago. Even though they were at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, they were well-equipped, well-trained, and well-coordinated. In the end, they managed to eliminate nearly 15,000 enemies in just over 10 days. Dividing up the losses, each soldier managed to kill at least 10 enemies. This was already a very impressive achievement. Yang Qindong's thoughts shifted from the question of the number of troops. When he looked at the two company commanders again, his expression was already very firm. "All right, then inform all the soldiers we can contact to start the counterattack. But at the very least, we have to use platoons as a unit. If the number of soldiers is lower than this unit, we can only engage in guerrilla warfare and cannot initiate an attack. A platoon has at least 30 men. With 30 men as a unit, this number is already very low. If the number of soldiers is lower than this number, then it is no longer an attack, but a suicide mission. After all, if the number of soldiers is too small, there is no way to coordinate. Even if they have advanced firearms, if the enemy numbers are too high, they may not even have time to reload. If the battle really escalates to close quarters, then the losses of the Cold Vanguard Battalion would be unavoidable. This would make Wu Xing have no choice but to answer to Yang Qindong. The orders from the battalion headquarters were quickly relayed through the Cold Vanguard Battalion's unique method of communication. Following that, the Cold Vanguard Battalion soldiers who were originally hidden in various places started to gather. They formed platoons and began their counterattack. With the Cold Vanguard Battalion's actions, the sound of gunfire in the rainforest became more intense. Once they formed a platoon, they would appear in the open in front of the Jiaoji soldiers who were still searching for them and wipe them out. Under the long-range attacks of the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, the Jiaoji centurions and Kiliarchs who thought they had finally found their targets and were able to contribute greatly to the battle began to flee in all directions. An unorganized army was just a bunch of stragglers who couldn't withstand a single blow. Even though the Cold Vanguard Battalion didn't have many soldiers, they were all elites. Every time they fired a clip of bullets, a few Jiaoji soldiers would be killed. A platoon of Cold Vanguard Battalion soldiers could charge up to 300 to 400 people at a time. The Jiaoji soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were also terrified. They no longer had any intention of exterminating the mercenaries. Once they had the chance, they would flee in all directions. They couldn't form any effective resistance. Wang Gengwang, who was retreating back to Hanoi City, originally planned to gather his troops as he retreated. However, along the way, he only managed to gather less than 5,000 men. When he heard that at least 5,000 soldiers were killed by the mercenaries or escaped to God knows where, he clenched his teeth in anger. "General, should we go back now and fight the mercenaries until both sides suffer, or should we continue to retreat?" Seeing that the death toll was increasing, the Kiliarchs didn't dare to make a decision on their own. They could only pass the problem to Rwangengwang. Chapter 486. Rwangengwang's heart was filled with hatred. His face was so dark that it was almost dripping water. However, after a moment of hesitation, he gritted his teeth and said, "Retreat. Don't bother about the others. The safety of the king comes first." "Yes, retreat." Hearing Rwangengwang's final decision, the other Kiliarchs couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. An entire army of 30,000 had entered the Langsun region. Not only did they not encounter the enemy, but they had also lost half of their forces. They didn't want to face such an opponent at all. Now that there was a clear order, who would dare to raise any objections? Rwangengwang retreated. He threw everything he could in the rainforest of the capital city just so that he could leave faster. After Wu Xing's troops killed a few Jiaoji scattered soldiers who had left the main group, they saw military supplies strewn all over the mountains and plains. There were also some iron weapons that they had snatched from the Han people after entering Yunnan. Now, in order to save their lives, these heavy ironware were abandoned. Yes, Jiaoji was that poor. They didn't have many resources. Even the ironware from the Han people's homes was considered good stuff in the eyes of the Jiaoji soldiers. "Battalion commander, what should we do? Are we still chasing after them?" the subordinate officer asked with a tired look on his face. Wu Xing really wanted to continue chasing. This way, he believed that he would be able to reap some benefits when facing an army without any morale. However, he knew that the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard had been fighting continuously for more than 36 hours. They were really too tired. If they continued chasing, there would definitely be soldiers who would leave the army due to exhaustion. Since he had brought these people out, he would naturally try his best to bring them back. Tell the soldiers to find a place to bury these ironware and mark it. Then, find a safe place to rest. Yes. The officers below couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when they heard that they could finally rest. They were really worried that the battalion commander would be so eager to gain merit that he would disregard everything and continue to kill the enemy. In that case, they would definitely carry out the orders. However, there would be casualties due to non-combat situations. That would definitely hurt their own foundation. After this battle in the rainforest, the combat power of all the soldiers who participated in the battle had increased by more than one level. Such elites would naturally become the backbone of Cold Vanguard in the future. Losing even one of them would be a heart-wrenching matter. When the mercenaries stopped chasing, Rwangengwang could finally breathe a sigh of relief. However, the speed of his army did not slow down. On the contrary, they sped up. They were really afraid. They were afraid that if they relaxed, the mercenaries would chase after them and their losses would be even greater. Rwangengwang's fleeing speed was extremely fast, which naturally gave way to Qin Heijin's troops. Originally, they only had to face 1.5 battalions of mercenaries, but after Wu Sheng and the rest of the Cold Vanguard troops had a good night's rest, the 3 battalions of mercenaries gathered together the next day. With their increased strength, they put more pressure on the black soldiers and suffered greater losses. Putting aside the fact that the Jiaoji army in the Langsun region was constantly fighting and retreating, they had to pay a heavy price every day. In front of Beidai City, General Huang Hua, who was ordered by King Lili to bring 5,000 soldiers, had also arrived. The moment they arrived at Beidai City, Huang Hua ordered the army to get into formation. Following which, the siege began. The moment Huang Hua's army arrived at the city, the originally quiet Beidai City became restless. Some of the Jiaoji tycoons who had been hiding in their homes took the opportunity to cause trouble, intending to work together to retake Beidai City. The reason why these tycoons dared to make a move was because they had already seen that there were not many enemies, only about 1,000 of them. This was the reason why they dared to make such a huge bet. 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, who had long guessed that such a situation would occur, first withdrew his army, then arranged for 2 companies of auxiliary soldiers to be stationed at the West Gate. They were only waiting for the guards organized by the rich and powerful in the city to rush over, and then a burst of continuous fire. After a series of concentrated gunshots, nearly 100 corpses were left behind in front of the Western Gate. Only then did the rich people feel fear. Feeling fear, they retreated to their own courtyards and placed all their hopes on the Jiaoji army outside the city. After dealing with the internal threat, Chen Bo focused his attention on the Jiaoji army's siege. From afar, there were countless Jiaoji soldiers standing at the west gate of Beidai city. In comparison, there were only 3 battalions of Yang family soldiers guarding the city. However, this disadvantage in numbers didn't make Chen Bo and his soldiers show any signs of fear or worry. They were relying on the firearms in their hands. Brothers, don't panic. Let the enemies come first. When they are 100 meters away, the auxiliary soldiers will open fire and give them a head-on blow. Once they are about to retreat, the cold vanguard warriors will use 600 meters as a boundary to reap the lives of the enemies. In short, since the enemies are here, we cannot let them retreat too easily. Everyone, remember. Standing on top of the city gate tower, Chen Bo used his nightmare mirror to observe every move of the Jiaoji army. He calmly gave out orders. This wasn't the first time Chen Bo led an army alone. However, in the past, he only fought on a small scale within the Ming dynasty. When he fought against the Huang bandits, he was accompanied by other Ming soldiers and couldn't unleash his full potential. This time, however, there were no restraints and he could fight as he pleased. With Chen Bo's calm command, the cold vanguard warriors, who were already elites, were fearless. Even when facing an enemy 4 times their number, they didn't show any signs of fear. On the contrary, each of them hoped that the enemy would come quickly and not be scared away. They didn't want the credit to fly away from them. The soldiers were of one mind. Chen Bo, who had finished his preparations, led the 3 battalions of soldiers to look ahead with bright eyes. Some of the company commanders and platoon commanders were still mumbling to themselves, "Come on, don't worry, we won't attack you first. We'll come as soon as possible." It seemed like their prayers were effective. The Jiaoji army, who had already set up a formation outside Beidai city, finally moved. A total of 3,000 men, more than half of the army, began to move towards the west gate. There were only 5,000 men. Arranging 3,000 men for a charge was also the idea of the commander, Huang Hua. The intelligence report stated that the entire mercenary army only had about 10,000 men. There must be a portion of them in the Langsun region. The conquered Qing city also needed to be defended. Therefore, there shouldn't be too many enemies in Beidai city. At the very least, there shouldn't be much more than the soldiers under his command. Since there weren't many enemies, Huang Hua decided to send 3,000 men for a charge. He wanted to use the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy. Perhaps this would be a good start. As for the remaining 2,000 men, there was a reason for that. Once the 3,000 vanguards were successful, the 2,000 at the back would have to join in and achieve victory in one go. However, if the situation wasn't good, the 2,000 men under his command would be able to hold their ground. At the very least, they would have the ability to defend. With this thought in mind, the 3,000 soldiers that Huang Huaxian had sent out began to move. Of the 3,000 men, 500 shield-bearers walked at the front. They were there to defend against the enemy's arrows. Behind him were 1,000 archers who were there to assist in the attack. Then there were 500 ladders. They were in groups of 5 and they were holding a total of 100 wooden ladders. This was to ensure that once the siege began, they could use the ladders to rush to the west gate of Beidai city. Finally, there were 1,000 siege soldiers. They held swords, spears, axes, and halberds in their hands. Their weapons were different, but once they reached the top of the tower, it was time for them to display their strength. With the combination of long and short weapons, their attack power was not low. The 3,000 soldiers of the Jiaoji army marched forward in an orderly fashion. From afar, they looked like a black mass. As they approached, it felt like dark clouds were pressing down on one's head. When they were still far away, the Jiaoji army moved very quickly. At least, that was the case when they were 400 meters away. They probably knew that within this distance, no one could threaten their safety. However, as soon as they entered the 400-meter boundary, their footsteps began to slow down. The shield-bearers were ready to raise their shields at any time. The archers were ready to shoot their arrows when they were within 100 meters. The ladder-bearers were ready to charge recklessly and set up scaling ladders to besiege the city. As they continued to move forward, when they were 300 meters away, their preparations became more complete. Just like the ladders were originally carried. Now, they were lifted and placed at their waists. When the time was right, they could raise them above their heads and charge forward. At a distance of 300 meters, the cold vanguard soldiers could already fire and achieve their goal of killing the enemy. However, Battalion Commander Chen Bo had already given the order to shoot only when the enemy was close enough. As a result, not only did no one open fire, they didn't even turn off the safety on their guns. This was also to prevent someone from getting too excited and accidentally firing, scaring away the fat meat in their hands. If that happened, they wouldn't even be able to find a place to cry. Under the gaze of the 3 battalions of the Yangxia army, the 3,000 Jiaoji army approached 200 meters, 150 meters, 120 meters. Everyone, get ready. Release the safety. When they were 120 meters away, Chen Bo's calm voice rang out. Originally, he could have waited a little longer. However, he didn't want to wait until they were 100 meters away. He didn't want to wait for the enemy's archers to be able to fire before returning fire. If that happened, who knew if any of the arrows would hit the city walls and injure his soldiers? The losses would outweigh the gains. Chapter 487. Once the order was given, the sound of the guns being released could be heard. Then, the soldiers who were watching on the sidelines began to aim according to the 3 points in a straight line, each looking for their own target. After all this was done, the Jiaoji army had only moved 10 meters. However, within this 10-meter distance, one could clearly see that their footsteps had begun to increase. Clearly, they were worried that the mercenaries on the city wall would suddenly fire arrows. If their charging speed was fast enough, even though they might not be able to dodge the arrows, at least they would have a higher chance of success. The enemy changed from a slow pace to a fast pace, and then they began to jog. This was clearly a sign that they were about to increase their speed. The eyes of Battalion Commander Chen Bo, who was leading the team, narrowed. He held the Type 95 in his hand and pressed the butt of the gun against his shoulder. Using this as a support, he assumed a very standard and beautiful standing posture while firing the gun. Not only Chen Bo, but all the gunmen were ready to shoot. Now, they only needed to wait for the order to shoot the enemy and make a contribution. Finally, while jogging, the 3,000 Jiaoji soldiers at the front, who were the shield soldiers, had reached the 100-meter mark. The archers behind them also took out their feathered bows and arrows from the quivers on their waists, ready to draw their bows and shoot. Fire! Chen Bo's voice suddenly rang out. Following this voice, the Type 95 in his hand fired the first shot. The target was a person who looked like a small general in the Jiaoji army. Bang! Bang 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 bang! After the sound of a gunshot, what followed was the scene of thousands of guns being fired. Bursts of popping sounds rang out, and the Jiaoji soldiers fell to the ground one after another. There was no sound of arrows piercing through the air, nor was there a dense cloud of arrows covering the sky. There was only the sound of gunshots and the appearance of the bullets shooting out in a straight line. This was completely different from normal warfare, and instantly caught the Jiaoji soldiers off guard. The first unlucky ones to be chosen as targets were naturally the 1,000 archers. They were the only ones who could pose a threat to the Leng Feng soldiers on the city gate tower. Naturally, they were the ones who suffered the most. Many archers didn't even have time to hold the arrows in their hands before they fell to the ground. Horrifying bloody holes could be seen in their heads. There were also some archers who had just grabbed their arrows and fell to the ground. Even when they died, their faces were filled with unwillingness. Clearly, they couldn't understand why they had died before they could even release their arrows or see the enemy's arrows flying towards them. 1,000 archers were the first to meet with misfortune. Most of them died before they could even set out. Less than 100 of them released their arrows anxiously. However, due to panic or their limited strength, they did not manage to hit the city gate tower. Or perhaps they had already lost their aim. Even if they managed to hit the city gate tower, they did not manage to hit the designated spot. Cold blade, fire. They had already begun to attack. Just now, the 600 auxiliary soldiers had fired first, causing many enemy casualties and throwing the enemy camp into chaos. Seizing the opportunity, Chen Bo gave another shout, and the 400 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard began to attack from the furthest distance. 600 to 700 meters away, the square formation of the Jiaoji soldiers wielding sabers, spears, swords, and halberds also became the first target. The pitiful Jiaoji soldiers were still too far away and were completely unprepared. Suddenly, another wave of concentrated gunshots rang out. Many soldiers fell to the ground with a look of disbelief. This scene gave everyone a huge fright. The final range of an arrow wasn't 150 meters. At such a distance, only those with extremely strong arms could do it. Archers like this were 1 in 1,000. Most of the time, being able to shoot a distance of 100 meters and hit the target with the bow was already very difficult. In reality, the true killing range of an archer was around 60 meters. At such a distance, as long as one had undergone strict training and possessed a certain level of strength, one would be able to kill the enemy. In other words, the actual killing range of an arrow was only around 60 to 70 meters. However, a new weapon that could kill people from 600 meters away had suddenly appeared. That was equivalent to 10 times their attacking range. It was no wonder that the Jiaoji soldiers were afraid, flustered, and terrified. This type of sudden attack also caused the minds of the Jiaoji soldiers 600 to 700 meters away to become chaotic. Even though they saw their comrades die miserably beside them, there were still very few people who made the preparations to flee. At this moment, they were truly beaten silly. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was stunned, the Lengfeng soldiers and auxiliary soldiers on the western wall of Beidai city rained down bullets as though they were free. One after another, the Jiaoji soldiers who were targeted were hit by bullets and fell to the ground. There were too many enemies, too many targets, and too many choices. As a result, many of the soldiers switched from single shots to consecutive shots. The gunshots became even more intense. In just a few breaths, too many corpses had fallen below the city wall. The Jiaoji soldiers who were lucky enough to survive finally regained their senses and started to retreat frantically. However, no matter how fast they ran, within a distance of 600 meters, they would still become living targets. Of the more than 1,000 people who ran back, less than 1/10 of them were lucky enough to survive. After witnessing the power of these advanced firearms, the Jiaoji soldiers had long given up on the idea of attacking the city. They ran as fast as they could. Many of them even threw away their weapons and other unnecessary items on the ground, hoping to move forward with light equipment so that they could run faster. As a result, the 500 shield bearers who were walking at the front were in a difficult position. They were originally charging at the front. With the shields in their hands, normal arrows would not be able to harm them. However, even though the shield seemed to be made of iron, its defensive power was greatly reduced in the face of advanced firearms. There were even situations where the shields were penetrated by bullets. Compared to the penetrative power of the bullets, these Jiaoji shield bearers who were holding wooden shields could not put up any effective resistance. That's right, they were holding wooden shields. As a Jiaoji that lacked metal and all sorts of resources, the number of soldiers who possessed metal shields was extremely small. Only the elites of the elites could possess such shields. Usually, the shields used in the army were only made of wood. It was sufficient to defend against long-range arrows. However, when faced with the sudden attack of bullets, it was naturally inferior. Wooden shields could not block bullets, and they were charging too close to the front. As a result, the 500 shield-bearers were in an awkward position. Should they run? If they charged too close to the front, they would definitely not be able to escape. Should they charge? With a wooden shield in their left hand and a dagger in their right hand, they were still fine in close combat. However, when faced with a 10-meter-tall city wall, they were powerless. They could neither fight nor flee, especially when some of the 500 shield-bearers wanted to retreat but were killed. On the contrary, none of the 450 shield-bearers who stood still and did not dare to move were hurt. Instead, they chose to stay where they were. If they stayed where they were, they would most likely become captives and lose their freedom. However, compared to retreating and dying, it was still much better. As a result, a somewhat dramatic scene appeared on the battlefield. The 400 shield-bearers seemed to be wandering outside the battlefield. They stood there in an orderly manner, waiting for the judgment of the god of fate. Naturally, Uncle Chen also saw the 500 shield-bearers. However, when he saw that they did not act rashly and instead stood there obediently, he stopped thinking of killing them. Bullets cost money and the materials required were not cheap. If he could save a bullet, it was better to save a bullet. Moreover, the 500 shield-bearers were all able-bodied men. For the sixth young master who placed great emphasis on manpower, this was a considerable gain. Therefore, only a company of auxiliary soldiers were keeping an eye on the shield-bearers. The rest of the soldiers continued to do what they were supposed to do. They continued to fire continuously. However, because the enemies who could escape had already run far away, they had already switched from continuous fire to burst fire. A total of 3,000 people charged forward, but in the end, less than 200 managed to escape. Other than the 400 shield-bearers, the Jiaoji army suffered a tragic loss of 2,000 people in just a short period of time. This result completely frightened the Jiaoji army's general Huang Hua. After this battle, he finally understood why Chu-Yi City and Beidai City fell so quickly. Faced with such advanced firearms, he was afraid that no one would be able to stop them. "General, what do we do?" Seeing that the soldiers who charged out were retreating at an even faster speed and less than a tenth of them survived, a Chiliarch could not help but look at Huang Hua with a bitter expression. Frowning deeply, Huang Hua muttered to himself for a moment before making the decision to retreat. They had already lost more than half of their forces and their morale was so unstable. If they continued to charge forward, they would not be able to return. Even if the king wanted to punish them, they could only choose to retreat. The general's decision to retreat made the Chiliarch beside him heave a sigh of relief. Following the order, the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were already afraid of being beaten up frantically retreated at a speed that was more than 2 times faster than when they came. From the looks of it, humans truly cherished their lives. The Jiaoji army retreated. On the city walls, not a single soldier cheered loudly. Perhaps to them, this was something that could not be any more normal. Since that was the case, what was there to be happy about? On the contrary, there were 200 people who were displeased. They were the auxiliary soldiers who were arranged to guard Beidai City. Because of the previous incident where the Jiaoji citizens charged into the city, Chen Bo was worried that there would be a fire behind him. Thus, he arranged for these 200 people to guard the rear. This also meant that they did not have any chance to participate in the battle. It was inevitable that they would feel resentful. Chapter 488. In order to ensure fairness, the 450 Jiaoji shield-bearers who didn't dare to move were handed over to the 200 auxiliary soldiers. No matter what, it could be said that others ate the meat while they ate the soup. Thus, the 200 auxiliary soldiers opened the city gates under the lead of the 2 company commanders and walked out while glaring fiercely. In order to survive, the shield-bearers had thrown all their weapons to the ground. Finally, they saw the mercenaries in green walk out. For some reason, they were not afraid at all. Instead, they felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. If no one came out to receive them, it would be a dead end. Beidai City's defense was a great victory. More than 2,300 enemies were killed, nearly 500 were captured, and countless military supplies were obtained. When Yang Qindong rushed to Beidai City with the main force of more than 7,000 people, he heard such a report. On the other hand, in Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoxi, bad news came one after another. As the king, Li seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. There were even some voices questioning him, saying that he was going to let the young crown prince take over the throne in advance. When King Li heard these discussions, he only replied that he understood in a daze. Then, he turned around and entered the royal palace, not seeing anyone else. The king didn't want to see anyone. This caused the officials to panic. Many of them went to Prime Minister Wan Chunqing to ask for advice. Compared to the other officials who were panicking, Prime Minister Wan Chunqing was much calmer. Everyone, don't worry. The crown prince is about to enter the city. Let's go welcome him together. Although Li had many concubines, he only had 2 sons. One was his eldest son, Li Siki, but he died early. The other was the crown prince's second son, Li Yuanlong. All this time, in order to not have any conflicts with the royal family, Li Yuanlong chose to go to Zhoushan Prefecture in the south of Jiaoxi. Since he was his father's only son, he wouldn't pass the throne to anyone else. Thus, the crown prince left the capital. Needless to say, this Li Yuanlong was quite capable. According to history, he had indeed inherited Li's legacy. During his reign as the king, the strength of Jiaoxi had risen significantly. Geniuses would always show themselves wherever they went. For example, in Zhoushan County, he relied on the geographical environment near the sea to make Zhoushan County very prosperous. Of course, it was also because it was close to the sea that he had heard about mercenaries. Occasionally, when he sent out ships to trade with other countries, he would see mercenary warships with 5-starred red flags hanging high above. Compared to the ships of other small countries, the warships of the mercenaries were very domineering in terms of size, water consumption, and attack power. Rumor had it that their ships were equipped with heavy cannons that could sink any hostile ships from a long distance away. Slowly, the ships of the mercenaries became the masters of this area. If other ships wanted to pass through here, they had to pay a heavy tax. Li Yuanlong still remembered the first time he saw a mercenary warship with a red flag hanging high above the sea. Naturally, he was filled with envy when he saw the huge ship sailing past. Since then, Li Yuanlong had given strict orders to his subordinates to not make enemies with the mercenaries. On the contrary, they were to pay taxes on time and not play any tricks. It was because of this extremely correct decision that the ships of Jiaoxi had been very safe. Because of this, they had made many maritime transactions with other countries and earned a lot of money. It was a pity that maritime transactions prohibited the use of ironware. Otherwise, Jiaoxi would have been able to obtain even more ironware and increase the strength of its army. However, he never expected that his father and his country would make enemies with the mercenaries and even lead them to kill their way into the country. When he heard the news, Li Yuanlong rushed over with the 30,000 men of the crown prince's personal guards. On the way, he heard the news of the defeat of the army outside Beidai City. Outside the east gate of Hanoi City, Prime Minister Wan Chunqing led a group of civil and military officials to welcome the crown prince, Li Yuanlong. The officials warmly greeted the crown prince, the future king. For the sake of their future, it seemed like everyone wanted to curry favor with him. On the surface, Li Yuanlong was chatting and laughing with the officials. However, he quickly called Prime Minister Wan Chunqing to the side. Prime Minister Wan, what is going on? Are the mercenaries really that strong on land? Sigh. At the mention of this question, the wise Wan Chunqing immediately shook his head in pain. Yes, Your Highness. General Huang Hua came back and said that the enemy had a type of gun that could shoot a few hundred feet away. It could take a person's life on the spot. A gun that could shoot a few hundred feet away. Even though Li Yuanlong was somewhat prepared, when he heard this answer, he was still shocked and sighed. Because of Li Yuanlong's strategy, he had always thought that the Jiaoji ships and the mercenaries' ships on the sea were peaceful. This made him think that the enemy's cannons were limited in power. Therefore, they did not make enemies everywhere and became the true overlord of the sea. However, when he heard that they had such a powerful gun, he understood that it was not that they did not have the power to dominate, but that they were not willing to do so. As for the reason, others might not know, but Yang Qindong understood it best. It was that they did not have enough people and manpower. It was because they did not have enough people. Even if they occupied some places now, they would not be able to control them. Facing the enemy's armed forces, he could lead his army to wipe them out, but he couldn't just kill the foreign civilians. If he wanted to rule the world, killing them wouldn't solve the problem. He needed more Han people. Some glory wasn't just for him to enjoy, he needed more Han people to enjoy it together with him. Li Yuanlong was not Yang Qindong. Of course, he did not understand what the other party was thinking. When he heard that the mercenaries had attacked the country, he thought that his father had done something to offend them. Right, Prime Minister Yuan, where is my father? After getting a rough understanding of the situation, Li Yuanlong asked with concern as he walked towards the palace in the city with the other officials. Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing said with an ugly expression, His Majesty, the king entered the harem alone. He did not allow anyone to disturb him. Anyone? Does that also include this prince? When Li Yuanlong heard this answer, he was first stunned. Then, he thought of something and revealed a look of joy. Yes. The king specifically said that he would not see the crown prince. Yuan Chunqing was much more straightforward when he replied. Since there were some things that could not be avoided, then there was no need to avoid it. Although it was a little bullying, he was the king after all. Furthermore, there was no need to bully a father and son. When he heard this affirmative answer, Li Yuanlong's expression slowly returned to normal. He finally understood that his father had left the mess for him to deal with. If there was a mistake, then it would be his fault. Not only would his father not support him, but he would also criticize him and even take back his authority. On the other hand, if he did it well, then his father would have to abdicate. Li Yuanlong was indeed someone who had been the crown prince for many years. He was able to understand the situation so quickly. This was also why Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing had an ugly expression when he answered this question. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, Li Yuanlong was the king and he was only the king's son. The so-called kinship. I almost forgot. In the face of huge benefits and reputation, there was no kinship in the royal family. After knowing his father's plan, Li Yuanlong did not have any intention of avoiding it. The fact that he had rushed over from Jiuzhen County after receiving the imperial edict was enough to explain everything. If he really wanted to avoid it, he could have just said that he was not feeling well and did not appear. Furthermore, as the crown prince and the future king, Li Yuanlong did not want to see anything happen to Jiaoji. However, since there was a problem, it had to be solved. The heavy responsibility of solving this problem fell on his shoulders. This was his responsibility. Since that is the case, I will have to trouble Prime Minister Yuan to gather all the officials. This crown prince would like to hear their opinions. Since the problem was to be solved, it was naturally Han Xin who gathered the soldiers. The more the better. If he listened to their opinions, he might be able to find a way to solve the problem. Although Li Yuanlong already had a way to solve the problem, it would cost him too much to complete it. If there was a better way, he would not mind accepting and listening to it. Yuan Chunqing knew that the crown prince was going to take over the government in advance, or rather, he was taking the initiative to take over the problem. He first looked at Li Yuanlong with an admiring gaze, then nodded and said, Okay, then I will gather all the officials and listen to the crown prince's instructions. Thank you, Prime Minister, Li Yuanlong replied in a respectful tone. After the crown prince entered the city, the first thing he did was to gather the important officials in the front hall of the palace to discuss important matters. All the officials of Jiaoji rushed over. None of them wanted to let go of this opportunity to show their faces. As a result, the hall that could normally only hold 50 to 60 officials was stuffed with over 100 people, making it seem very crowded. Li Yuanlong didn't have the slightest intention of chasing them away. On the contrary, he maintained a smile on his face, showing a very patient look. When almost everyone had arrived, at least no one was rushing over from the outside, he coughed lightly and attracted everyone's attention to himself. With this light cough, the hall quieted down. Then, more than 200 eyes stared at Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. They all wanted to hear what this Crown Prince would say and how he would resolve the predicament in front of them. Chapter 489. Everyone. After the hall fell silent, Li Yuanlong's voice was heard. I'm sure everyone knows what kind of situation we are facing now. The mercenaries are coming with a vengeance, and they are equipped with advanced firearms that can take people's lives from hundreds of zhang away. Our army is no match for them, and we have already lost several battles. Right now, the enemy has already taken over Beatty City, which is less than 200 li away from our Jiaoji capital. At this time of crisis, I wonder if anyone has any ideas on how to retreat? After saying this, Li Yuanlong looked at the officials with anticipation. He wanted to see if there were any better ideas. After hearing the Crown Prince's words, the officials, who were still discussing spiritedly, fell completely silent. In fact, before the Crown Prince came, everyone had talked about the war in the country more than once. Huang Hua had returned, Jishu and Longbian had also sent back news, confirming that the mercenaries had a powerful killing weapon in their hands that was far beyond their imagination. It was an advanced flintlock that could fire continuously and was extremely accurate. It was said that the firearm could shoot up to 600 to 700 meters away. When it landed on a person, it could still be fatal. In comparison, the bows and arrows in their hands could only shoot up to 100 meters. When it was truly lethal, it could only shoot up to 50 to 60 meters. The difference was more than 10 times. How could they fight this war? But what could they do if they couldn't win? This was where they lived, and the mercenaries belonged to outsiders. Even if they were outsiders, they couldn't just let them do whatever they wanted, right? When the king refused to see anyone, everyone put all their hopes on the Crown Prince. But now that the Crown Prince asked this question, how could they answer? Everyone who couldn't think of a solution could only turn their attention to Li Yuanlong. In their opinion, they didn't have the ability to find a solution, but the Crown Prince must have a solution. No one spoke. Although this was within Li Yuanlong's expectations, he still couldn't help but let out a long sigh when he saw the outcome. Is there really no solution to this? Seeing how disappointed the Crown Prince was, the officials couldn't help but lower their heads. Obviously, they didn't want the Crown Prince to see their incompetent side. On the other hand, some of the military officials had a helpless look on their faces, but none of them lowered their heads. As generals, they were originally prepared to sacrifice their lives for the country. They were not afraid of death. After seeing that the civil officials were helpless, the generals led by the famous General Fan Yuhai stepped forward. Your Highness, we are willing to be the vanguard. Once you give the order, no one will disobey. More than a dozen generals stood up and spoke in unison. It was quite imposing. Their words caused the civil officials who had their heads lowered to tremble. It also caused Li Yuanlong, who was seated at the head of the table, to light up. No matter what, as long as there are generals who dare to fight, Jiaoji will not fall. The most important thing was that with the support of these generals, his position as the temporary commander would be stable. Good. Generals, your courage is commendable. This Crown Prince is very happy. Li Yuanlong's gaze fell on Fan Yuhai, Huang Hua, and the other generals as he spoke emotionally. After speaking, he shook his head. However, there is a huge disparity in the weapons of both sides. Even if the generals aren't afraid of death, this crown prince doesn't want to throw away his life. Before we can think of a better solution, we have to carefully consider whether to fight or not. Your Highness. When Fan Yuhai heard the meaning behind Li Yuanlong's words, he became anxious. He could sense that the crown prince was going to give up the battle and ask for peace. Alright, this crown prince has his own plans. Where is the prime minister? Li Yuanlong interrupted Fan Yuhai's next words and swept his gaze across the officials. This old official is here. Wan Chunqing took a step forward. This crown prince orders you to represent this crown prince in negotiating with the mercenaries in Beidao City. See what they want. If they are willing to withdraw their troops, we are willing to compensate them. Are you willing to take up this task? Since he couldn't find a better solution, Li Yuanlong followed his original plan. This was going to ask for peace. Speaking of which, this wasn't a good task. As the prime minister of the country and the leader of the officials, if Wan Chunqing said he wasn't willing, no one could force him. However, after his expression changed a few times, he still nodded and agreed. Since it is the crown prince's order, this old official is willing to do it. Good, as expected of the prime minister of the country. Then I will have to trouble you. You can rest assured that the negotiation is just a method. From today onwards, we will use the power of the country to forge iron on a large scale and strive to forge more iron shields and other iron weapons. This will ensure that when the mercenaries are forced to fight, we won't be too passive. In addition, this crown prince will send people to the great Ming dynasty to present a letter of credence. I am willing to be a subject in exchange for the mercenaries' withdrawal. Your Highness the Crown Prince. Hearing this, all the officials fell to their knees one by one. Of course, they knew that everything they had today was not easy to come by. Now that Li Yuanlong had made so many concessions, they felt very wronged. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that there was no better way to resolve this crisis than this method. Sai, if you want dignity, you need to be strong enough. I hope that after this incident, everyone can work together to make Jiaoji even stronger. This way, no one will look down on us and Jiaoji in the future. Long live your Highness the Crown Prince. Hearing Li Yuanlong's words of instruction, all the officials revealed their determination to strive for greatness. The Crown Prince saw all of this and felt very gratified. If everyone could change after this ordeal, it would be a good thing. Of course, there was one thing that Li Yuanlong would not say out loud. That was, the negotiation was just a pretense. His real goal was to use this opportunity to forge more iron weapons to fight the enemy. Being influenced by what he saw and heard since he was young, he did not believe that begging could be exchanged for peace. Only by becoming stronger would others look up to him. That was where true strength lied. Even if the enemy had such advanced firearms, with Jiaoji's current conditions, it would require too much effort to win the war. If things went wrong, the foundation of Jiaoji would be shaken. This was not something that the ambitious Li Yuanlong wanted to see. What he needed was to win this war with the smallest price. For this reason, he did not hesitate to temporarily lower his head to the great Ming dynasty in order to obtain their support. He had already asked around and found out that the enemy's general was the Duke of Loyalty. Since the Duke was conferred by the great Ming dynasty, this matter would be easy to handle. As long as the great Ming dynasty's emperor ordered him to retreat, how would the enemy dare to not retreat? When that time came, it would be time for him to launch an all-out counterattack. He might even launch a surprise attack while the enemy was retreating. If things went well, he might even be able to obtain those advanced firearms for his own use. As for whether the great Ming dynasty would do as he wished and request Yang Qindong to retreat, there was no need to think too much about this. What was the great Ming dynasty? It was a great nation. The most important thing was what others thought of them. As long as they said something nice, or even made some verbal promises, the great Ming dynasty would definitely do as they said for the sake of their reputation. This was what it meant to suffer because of their reputation. In order to gain a good reputation and a magnanimous title, countless dynasties in history had paid a heavy price for this. Even Li Yuanlong could see this point and use it to his advantage. It was clear that such a huge shortcoming hindered China's development. After the impromptu court meeting ended, Li Yuanlong found Prime Minister Yuan Chuncheng and told him his true purpose. Prime Minister, when you go to the mercenary camp, don't be too anxious. The negotiations can be done slowly. In this case, the people I sent to the Great Ming Dynasty to ask for peace will cooperate with you to deliver the good news. Rest assured. Considering the distance between Jiaoji and the Great Ming Dynasty, some things could not be done in a day. How to fight for time was what Yuan Chunqing needed to do. After understanding the Crown Prince's intention, Yuan Chunqing was very relieved. He was worried that the Crown Prince would be scared. If that was the case, how could he lead Jiaoji to greater heights? Fortunately, everything was just a temporary measure. A person who could adapt to circumstances like this was the true leader of Jiaoji. With a face full of admiration, Yuan Chunqing confidently patted his chest and promised Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, please rest assured. Once I'm here, it won't be a problem to delay for 10 to 15 days. Okay, this Crown Prince will order the people who go to the Great Ming Dynasty to ask for peace to speed up," Li Yuanlong also vowed. In general, he valued the Prime Minister's talent very much. Naturally, he did not want anything to happen to him. On the night after the two of them discussed, the officials who went to the Great Ming Dynasty to ask for peace secretly departed. On the morning of the second day, Yuan Chunqing changed into a brand new official uniform and led a group of personal attendants out of Hanoi City. They headed straight for Beidai City, which was 200 li away. Just as the group departed, a messenger from Jiaoji rushed to Beidai City ahead of them and explained the Prime Minister's intentions. Beidai City. With the arrival of Yang Qindong's main forces, the city changed again. The rich people who instigated others to attack the mercenaries were all dragged out of their homes. Anyone who dared to resist or disobey was killed without mercy. Yang Qindong admitted that he did not have a good temper when it came to people of other races. This was especially so for people who wanted to stab him in the back. His hatred would not last overnight and he would take the opportunity to settle it. Under Yang Qindong's ruthless methods and policies, more than 20 rich people were brought out of their homes. In the beginning, there was some resistance. However, after more than 60 people from 2 families were killed, the rest became obedient. When the people were arrested, they were brought out of their homes obediently. Chapter 490. The orders of those who were brought out had already been decided. Just like in Qing City, the temporary small square was filled with wooden stakes. More than 20 people were tied to the stakes one by one. Then, the common people gathered. The Han people were singled out and naturally became a special class, living a life of eating and wearing warm clothes. After meeting up with Chen Bo's 3 battalions, the army expanded to over 8,000 men. It was more than enough to clear out a small Beidi city. In an instant, the Han people were elated. The Jiaoji people became restless. Even when they slept at night, they didn't dare to close their eyes. They were afraid that the mercenaries would rush in and take them out to parade through the streets. It was no wonder that the people of Jiaoji were so worried. Every day, because of the Han people's accusations, some of the Jiaoji people who had bullied them in the past were dragged out of their warm beds in the middle of the night. Only the people of Jiaoji who had always been kind to others could truly sleep peacefully. In just 2 days, the atmosphere of the entire Beidi city changed. Especially when the mercenaries announced that most of the people who were supposed to be captured had been captured. If there were no other accidents, they wouldn't disturb the lives of the commoners. Only then did the panic slowly subside. It was also at this time that news of Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing's arrival for negotiations reached the ears of Yang Qindong. According to the news, Prime Minister Yuan would arrive at Beidi City by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. At that time, he hoped that everyone would be able to sit down peacefully for a discussion. Some of the Yangtze new army officers didn't agree with the Jiaoji people's request for negotiations or even submission. They believed that since the advantage was in their hands, the moment they arrived at Jiaoji, it was only natural that the country would be destroyed. But for some reason, the sixth young master actually agreed to the request for negotiations. He even said that he would welcome the other party into the city. When the news came out, many of the officers were confused. Those with bad tempers were even more upset. In other words, if the order had been given by Yang Qindong, or if it had been any other general, even Ling Song and Gao Xiong would have been criticized. The officers did not understand this decision and were conflicted. As the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front, Kong Jia immediately went to Yang Qindong and expressed his concerns. Kong Jia had a troubled look on his face. When he saw Yang Qindong, he said, "Sixth young master, regarding the negotiation with Jiaoji, the officers are quite upset. Although we can't see anything wrong with them, if we can't explain it clearly, it will affect the morale of the soldiers." Kong Jia did not come here to criticize Yang Qindong. He did not dare to do so. He was just reporting his concerns because of his duty. Regarding this, Yang Qindong could understand. He naturally had such a plan. Since Kong Jia came looking for him, it was time for him to give the officers an explanation. "Alright, political commissar Kong, you don't have to be too anxious. Since this young master was the one who made the decision, I have my reasons. How about this? Inform all the officers and instructors of the various battalions to come for a meeting. This young master has something to say." Seeing that Yang Qindong wanted to personally explain the matter to everyone, Kong Jia was overjoyed. He immediately said, "This subordinate will inform them right away." In less than an hour, all the battalion commanders and instructors of the same rank in the city arrived at the general's residence. This used to be Pan Wenfei's residence, but he was now dead. Naturally, this place became Yang Qindong's temporary residence. More than 30 battalion commanders rushed over and stood orderly in the courtyard. Their eyes were fixed on Yang Qindong, who was looking up at the sky. This scene had been going on for quite a while. It was Yang Qindong who called them over, but the sixth young master did not say a word. He only looked up at the sky. Naturally, no one dared to rush him. They could only stand in standard military posture and straighten their bodies. After about the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Yang Qindong slowly lowered his head. To be honest, it was uncomfortable to look up at the sky for a long time. However, in order to remind these officers, there were some things that had to be done. It was a good thing that the officers could have their own opinions. However, if they dared to question the decision of their superior, they would not be allowed to do so. For example, a platoon commander only saw the soldiers of his platoon. That was bound to have limitations. A company commander only saw a company, unlike a battalion commander who could see the bigger picture. As the actual founder of the mercenary army, as well as the highest leader, Yang Qindong naturally saw the bigger picture. In order to accomplish this, it was inevitable that he would make some concessions. For example, allowing the Prime Minister of Jiaoji to negotiate was influenced by the bigger picture. As the territory grew larger in the future, the chances of something like this happening would also increase. He could not possibly explain it to his subordinates every single time. This time could be an exception, but it would only be limited to this one time. Through this incident, Yang Qindong wanted to tell everyone that they could doubt his decision, but they had to obey. Otherwise, they could just go back to wherever they wanted to go. There were no three-legged toads, but there were plenty of two-legged toads. Seeing that the time it took for an incense stick to burn had passed and the emotions of the officers had calmed down, Yang Qindong finally spoke. "I don't care what you think of yourselves. I don't care what kind of dissatisfaction or opinions you have in your hearts. Right now, this young master wants to ask you all one question. With our current strength, can we take down all of Jiaoji's cities without shedding any blood? Without shedding any blood?" Hearing Yang Qindong's words, all of the officers shook their heads in unison. In terms of brute force, there were no cities in Jiaoji that they could not take down. However, it was impossible for them to take down a city without using a single shot. Seeing that all of the officers were shaking their heads, Yang Qindong snorted coldly. A sharp glint flashed across his eyes. Since you can't do this, what right do you have to be arrogant? Why can't you have a proper discussion with the other party's envoy? Don't tell me that you want to show off your strength and disregard the safety of the Han civilians. Under the harsh criticism, the faces of some of the officers turned ugly. They only considered that their military strength was already very strong. The defense of Beatty City was the best example. Since they already had the initiative, why did they still have to negotiate? Wasn't this like a blind man lighting a lamp? However, when they heard Yang Qindong's questioning, they realized that such a rash action would cause the deaths of all the Han civilians in Jiaoji. Since they could slaughter their way into the various cities of Jiaoji, why couldn't the other party wipe out all the Han civilians in the city before they arrived? If that was the case, even if they killed the civilians, what would they gain? They were nothing more than empty cities with nothing to show for it. This was not their initial strategic goal. They wanted to open up another base here, not just to show off their tyrannical military strength. It could be said that when Yang Qindong said those words, many of the officers understood what was going on. They thought about how they were just ordinary civilians not long ago, living in an abyss of suffering. If it wasn't for the sixth young master who saved them, gave them authority, and gave them the most advanced firearms, some of them would have been dead by now. Most of them were still running around just to fill their stomachs. Where did the morale and drive come from? The officers who had figured everything out lowered their heads one by one. They were reflecting on their wrong thoughts. Seeing that the officers understood his intentions so quickly, Yang Qindong's expression turned slightly better. All right, I've explained everything to you. If anyone is still dissatisfied with the negotiations with Jiaoji, feel free to voice it out. However, if you don't have any objections now, you are not allowed to discuss this matter when you return. Otherwise, I'll fire every single one of you. I won't care what contributions you've made in the past. When that time comes, don't say that I, the sixth young master, won't be merciful. No, the sixth young master is wise. A wave of awe sounded from below. It was no wonder that these officers were able to think things through so quickly. Previously, they were limited by their foresight, and their thoughts were limited as well. Now that they knew that the sixth young master was thinking for the sake of the Han people, how could the officers who used to be part of him not understand? Meeting adjourned if you've thought things through. If you have time, train more and help the people in the city. It's better than letting your imagination run wild every day. Yang Qindong waved his hand casually, and the courtyard, which was filled with people, was emptied in an instant. Other than the fact that Yang Qindong was the sixth young master, he was able to pacify the officers so quickly because he was thinking for the sake of the Han people. Did you think he wanted to negotiate with them? However, if he didn't do so and forced Jiaoji into a corner, they would vent their anger on the Han people within their borders. By then, it wouldn't just be one or two people dying. Both the information from the Security Bureau and the words of the surrendered Hong Jin proved that out of the less than 3 million people in Jiaoji, there were at least 200,000 Han people. That was a ratio of 1 in 15. If all these Han people were killed, it would be a huge loss to the Han people. More importantly, many of these people had lived here since young. They had feelings for this place and knew how to build it. If a new batch of people were to come, they would have to adapt to this place all over again, and that would take up a lot of time. Right now, what Yang Qindong lacked the most was manpower and time. After all, the world was so big, who knew how many years it would take to conquer it all? Chapter 491. There were some things that could only be done as quickly as possible. In this way, whether or not the Han people in Jiaoji could survive, and how many of them could survive, would be directly related to the issue of ruling over this place. After convincing these officers, they would go and convince the platoon officers, and the entire army would become stable again. At noon on the second day, a group of 200 people arrived at the west side of Beidai City. Yuan Chunqing arrived at Beidai City 4 hours earlier than planned, and it was enough to show their sincerity and anxiousness. They were afraid that the mercenaries would attack the other cities again, so they rushed over without stopping to rest. When Yuan Chunqing arrived at the city, according to the plan, 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jia went out to welcome them, and led them into Beidai City. Trying his best to maintain a smile, Yuan Chunqing greeted Luo Pe and Kong Jia before asking about Yang Qindong. "May I know where the Duke of Loyalty is?" This time, this Prime Minister is under the orders of the Crown Prince to bring some gifts. The Duke of Loyalty is still inspecting the army. If Prime Minister Yuan is anxious, why don't you take a look with us? Political Commissar Kong Jia first smiled at Luo Pe, then turned to Yuan Chunqing and said in an unhurried tone. All of this was planned. Yuan Chunqing was anxious to see Yang Qindong and test his intentions, so he wanted to use this opportunity to give him a good beating, and let him see the morale and momentum of the mercenaries. When he heard that Yang Qindong was inspecting the army, a bitter expression flashed across Yuan Chunqing's face. To be able to become the Prime Minister, which one of them was an idiot? How could he not understand the meaning behind this? This was clearly a show of strength. But when he thought about it, he also wanted to use this opportunity to see the strength of the mercenaries. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Yuan Chunqing agreed. Then I will have to trouble the 2 generals. Under Luo Pe and Kong Jia's lead, they arrived at the northernmost part of the city. This was originally a trading market, but now it was occupied by the mercenaries as a temporary military camp. When they saw the temporary wooden fences from afar, they heard a neat battle cry. As the Prime Minister of the Jiaoxi nation, Yuan Chunqing had seen all kinds of situations. He had even entered the military camp of Jiaoxi countless times. However, this was the first time he had heard such a unified voice. He hadn't even seen anyone yet, but just from these deafening voices, he knew how high the morale of the mercenaries was. Yuan Chunqing's face changed slightly, which was noticed by Political Commissar Kong Jia, who was observing him from the side. Then he made a gesture of invitation with a smile. Prime Minister Yuan, don't you want to see the Duke of Loyalty? He's inside, please. Alright, please, let's go together. Yuan Chunqing forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart and said with a forced smile. There was an entire platoon of Ling Feng on duty at the entrance of the barracks. Although it seemed that there was no problem with the security of Beidai City, this place had just been recovered, so it was necessary to be vigilant. The platoon leader in charge of the guards at the entrance was Lu Jian. He was from Mount Qishan of Ryukyu Island. A while ago, he was caught by the Imperial Guards at the Song Rouge shop in Gaozhou Prefecture of the Southern Ming Dynasty. After passing the test, he didn't say a word about the mercenaries. A while ago, he made a military contribution in the defense of Beidai City and was promoted from an auxiliary platoon leader to a platoon leader of Ling Feng. This time, he was in charge of leading the platoon. When he saw the regiment commander and political commissar walking over with a group of people dressed in Jiaoxi attire, he raised his right hand with a wooden expression and said loudly, "Any outsiders who want to enter the barracks are not allowed to carry weapons. Please remove your weapons." Yuan Chunqing's face turned ugly when he heard Lu Jian's words. If the mercenaries wanted to deal with him, it should be very easy. However, at least they had weapons on them, so they still had a trace of resistance. But if even their weapons were confiscated, then wouldn't they become fish on the chopping board? Wouldn't they be at the mercy of others? Yuan Chunqing didn't agree immediately. The guards beside him stepped forward and pulled out their swords, shouting, "Who dares to confiscate our weapons? We are here to negotiate as representatives of the Jiaoxi army, not prisoners of a defeated army." Lu Jian narrowed his eyes and turned around to look at the row of Ling Feng soldiers behind him. The Ling Feng soldiers laughed out loud. Since he dared to use his saber in front of them, it just so happened that they hadn't fought for 2 days. It was a good opportunity to warm up. Seeing that Yuan Chunqing had unsheathed his saber, his opponents in military green camouflage uniforms laughed instead of getting angry. Yuan Chuanqing's bodyguards' expressions turned ugly. This mission wasn't easy. If they didn't handle it well, they would be in danger of dying. Everyone was already mentally prepared for this. However, if they could avoid death, it would be best if they didn't die. But now that the situation had come to this, they didn't know what to do for a moment. They could only look at Yuan Chuanqing with troubled gazes and wait for the Prime Minister to speak. Yuan Chuanqing's expression didn't look any better. Although he was a little angry at the arrogance of the mercenaries, who wanted to confiscate his weapons as soon as they met, he was here to negotiate, not to surrender. However, he hated his guards even more. How could they pull out their swords without an order? If they angered the mercenaries, not only would they fail the negotiation, but they would also lose their lives here. Death. Of course, Yuan Chuanqing was afraid. However, he was also afraid that he wouldn't be able to complete the mission given to him by the Crown Prince. Therefore, when he saw the inquisitive looks from the guards, he turned to Luo Pe and Kong Jia and said, "Generals, we are guests after all. A host should treat his guests well." Seeing how thick-skinned Yuan Chuanqing was, Political Commissar Kong Jia spoke up before Luo Pe could say anything. "Apologies, we didn't invite you here. Even if you are a guest, you have to follow the host's rules." The moment he finished speaking, Yuan Chuanqing's expression turned ugly. This time, they were the ones who initiated the negotiation. In other words, they were the weaker party. It was difficult for them to be treated with respect. Without looking at Yuan Chuanqing's expression, Kong Jia's eyes fell on Lu Jian. Although he didn't say anything, his meaning was very clear. He wanted Lu Jian to do whatever he wanted, regardless of the fact that they were here. Lu Jian was a smart person to be able to become the platoon leader of the Cold Vanguard platoon. Seeing that the regiment commander and the political commissar had nothing else to say, he chuckled with a sinister look on his face. He raised his right hand and said to the 30 soldiers behind him, "Brothers, someone dares to show off his weapon in front of us, Cold Edge. What do you think we should do? What else can we do? Teach him a lesson." The 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members were already itching for a fight. Now that they received their platoon leader's order, they knew what to do. Each of them smiled as they took out shiny bayonets from their waists and equipped them with the 95-style spearhead. Not using bullets was already a form of respect for the Jiaoji guards. Otherwise, the battle would have ended before the fight even started. The 30 soldiers equipped with the 95-style spearhead smiled as they surrounded Yuan Chuanqing. However, even though they were smiling, their formation wasn't messed up at all. Instead, they formed a ring-shaped formation. In just a few breaths, more than 30 of Yuan Chuanqing's guards were tightly surrounded. Seeing that the enemy was approaching, the guards gripped their bayonets tightly. Then, the captain of the guards asked Yuan Chuanqing for instructions. "Since you are all young and are part of the military, a proper spar can improve everyone's relationship. However, you must remember that your subordinates must know their limits. There must be no deaths." Yuan Chuanqing could see that this battle was inevitable. However, he didn't want anyone to die. Otherwise, the negotiation would fail. That was why he reminded the captain of the guards. Speaking of which, as the Prime Minister of Jiaoji, Yuan Chuanqing's guards were naturally skilled. In a one-on-one battle with cold weapons, he couldn't think of any possibility of failure. After Yuan Chuanqing gave the order, the captain of the guards nodded immediately. Then, he said to the guards beside him, "Master said that no one can die. You must act appropriately." "All right." All the guards nodded in unison. However, compared to the Cold Vanguard platoon members who were orderly and gave the same command, these people's answers were more scattered. Seeing that the Jiaoji guards were ready, Lu Jian also pulled out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95-style spearhead. Then, he said, "Team up with 3 people. Kill." When the word "kill" was uttered, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions changed. If it was said that there was still a hint of playfulness in their eyes just a moment ago, now all of them were much more focused. This was also due to Yang Qindong's usual teachings. In his words, mercy to the enemy was cruelty to the reader. Therefore, no matter what the situation was, as long as they fought, no matter how strong or weak the opponent was, they had to give it their all. This was the only way to ensure that they could unleash their full strength and not fail miserably. Under such teachings, the 30 Cold Vanguard platoon members' expressions turned serious when the word kill was uttered. It could be seen that they were in teams of 3 and quickly gathered together to form a team. They had undergone this training countless times. They were so familiar with it that the Jiaoji guards only saw a blur in front of their eyes. Suddenly, there were 3 enemies in front of them. Moreover, the 3 of them were back to back. After a rough look, it seemed like there were no openings for them to attack from. No matter which direction they attacked from, they would have to face the combined attacks of the 3 people. Chapter 492. This was the first time the guards saw this 3-3 formation, and they were at a loss of what to do. However, even though they were at a loss, it didn't mean that the Cold Vanguards would wait for an opportunity. Seeing their opponents' confused expressions, the 10 groups of Cold Vanguards launched their own fierce attacks. The dazzling white bayonets were everywhere. In just the blink of an eye, at least a dozen guards had been pierced by the bayonets and fell to the ground with a look of helplessness on their faces. Lu Jian also faced Yuan Chuanqing's guard captain with his bayonet. The only difference was that they were fighting one-on-one. The guard captain held a large machete in his hand. He was also tall and burly. In comparison, Lu Jian, who was only 1.78 meters tall, was at least half a head shorter than the guard captain. In terms of size, Lu Jian seemed to be at a disadvantage. This gave the guard captain a natural advantage, and he thought that Lu Jian couldn't withstand a single blow. However, just as this kind of underestimation was formed, a bayonet suddenly pierced towards his face. The guard captain's expression changed drastically. This kind of fierce attack made him lose focus for a moment, and then he instinctively raised his machete to block. Clang! Under the short exchange of weapons, the bayonet and machete clashed for a moment. Then, the bayonet that was knocked to the right suddenly turned around and stabbed towards the guard captain's waist. This move was so fast that it didn't seem to be a helpless move at all. It gave people the feeling that it was long prepared. To be able to become Yuan Chuanqing's trusted guard captain, his skills were naturally extraordinary. In order to obtain this position, he had competed for a long time and defeated many opponents. Therefore, even though the dagger was as fast as lightning, the captain still managed to dodge it at the last moment with a twist of his waist. This made Yuan Chuanqing, who was watching everything from the side, sigh in relief. Just as he thought that Lu Jian's attack was over, and it should be his guard captain's turn to counterattack, the bayonet suddenly turned around and left a bright red wound on the guard captain's waist. Hiss! After the sharp bayonet cut through his waist, the guard captain felt a burst of pain. His face couldn't help but twist and become a little terrifying. He had calculated everything, but he had never considered the uniqueness of the bayonet. It wasn't like a spear that could only stab, it wasn't like a saber that could only slash, it wasn't like a sword that could only stab, it wasn't like a sword that could only stab and slash. On the contrary, this bayonet could be used to stab, chop, whip, chop, and flick. It could be used to its fullest potential, and could form an extremely effective killing force. As such, when faced with such a weapon, if one were to view it as an ordinary weapon, it was inevitable that one would suffer a loss. Just like this time, the whipping stance left a bloody wound on his waist. As blood continued to drip from the wound, the guard captain felt that his reflexes and strength were gradually losing. The 30 or so guards were in the same situation as the head of the guards, or perhaps even worse. In front of the 3-3 battle formation, in front of the seemingly omnipotent bayonet, none of the guards could withstand a single blow from them. Often, the guards with some skills could block one bayonet attack, but the next bayonet would fly over, making it impossible to guard against and impossible to dodge. The moment Lu Jian injured the captain of the guards, the battle on this side had already ended. None of the 30 or so guards could stand. All of them were lying on the ground with injuries all over their bodies. This was because the Leng Feng soldiers didn't intend to kill and intentionally held back. If this was a real battlefield, it wouldn't be just 30 or so injured that were lying on the ground, but 30 or so corpses. Enough. Yuan Chuanqing's expression turned extremely ugly when he saw that the guards he was so proud of were all defeated in such a short period of time. He was afraid that more of his men would be injured or killed if this went on. Thus, he roared loudly. When the country's prime minister put on a stern face, he naturally had an intimidating aura. Unfortunately, this aura was nothing in the eyes of Luo Pe and Kong Jie. On the contrary, the latter said in a mocking tone, "What's wrong? Prime Minister Yuan, are you afraid? He, if you are, you can go back to Hanoi City now and regroup. We will see who wins and who loses on the battlefield." He was obviously trying to provoke Yuan Chuanqing. How could Yuan Chuanqing respond? Although he was a little annoyed that his guards didn't give him face, he wouldn't forget what his mission was. Next, he pretended that he didn't hear anything and said, "Generals, I'm here to see the Duke of Loyalty. Please lead the way. The Duke of Loyalty is in the barracks, but you can't bring any weapons in." Kong Jie reminded with a smile. This old man understands. This time, Yuan Chuanqing was straightforward. He reached out and took off the sword on his waist, which was used as an ornament, and handed it to a guard behind him who had just gotten up. Then, he said to the head guard, "Put down your weapon and follow this old man in." Yuan Chuanqing's cooperation made Kong Jie speechless. In his heart, he sighed at Yuan Chuanqing's flexibility. He signaled Commander Luo Po with his eyes. After seeing the other party nod in agreement, he smiled and said to Yuan Chuanqing, "Prime Minister Yuan, please." A fight broke out suddenly and ended quickly. In the end, Leng Feng won. Of course, Leng Feng had the advantage of being equipped with a bayonet, but more importantly, it was because of their cooperation. In other words, Leng Feng was Leng Feng. Even if he fought with cold weapons, one-on-one, or even one against many, he was still able to win. When they finally stepped into the barracks, they saw 5 guards every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. These guards were all Leng Feng. Their training was basically over. What they needed to improve was their killing techniques and proficiency on the battlefield. Therefore, whenever Yang Qindong had the time, he would train the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. Since they had the advantage in numbers, once they improved their battle prowess, it would be a huge boost to the overall battle prowess of the entire army. Under the guidance of Luo Pe and political commissar Kong Jie, Prime Minister Yuan Chuanqing led the head guard who had a piece of white cloth wrapped around his waist into the depths of the barracks. From afar, he saw a wide training field. There were thousands of soldiers practicing all kinds of drills. Some were practicing formation, some were practicing assassination, and some were practicing target shooting. There were also some huge logs placed there for a few people to hold together to train their strength. All in all, Yuan Chuanqing had never seen such a training method before. All of this gave him a sense of novelty. It was as if Granny Lu had entered the Grand View Garden. When he walked in front of a group of soldiers who were practicing walking under the slogan, 1, 2, 1, Yuan Chuanqing was very curious. He couldn't help but ask Luo Pe and Kong Jie beside him, "Generals, why are they practicing walking?" Of course, the 2 regimental officers wouldn't tell him the various benefits of proper formation training. They only smiled and pointed at a young man who was also dressed in camouflage clothing not far away. "That's the Duke of Loyalty. Let's go over." Oh. When he heard that Yang Qindong was right in front of him, Yuan Chuanqing set aside his curiosity and strode over to where Yang Qindong was. As he walked forward, his expression constantly changed. When he felt that the smile on his face was enough, he maintained this expression and walked over to Yang Qindong. "Duke, the Prime Minister of Jiaoji is here." Kong Jie's voice rang out respectfully and spread forward. Yang Qindong, who was watching the training on the field, didn't change his expression. It was as if he didn't hear Kong Jia at all and continued doing what he was supposed to do. After Kong Jia reported again, he didn't say anything else. He believed that the sixth young master must have heard what he said, but he didn't reply. There must be a reason why Kong Jia didn't ask anymore. Wan Chuncheng, who was originally smiling, stood there awkwardly. A full quarter of an hour passed. During this time, Yang Qindong said something to a few of the officers beside him. He pointed out many problems with the soldiers' training, but he didn't say a word to them. He didn't even turn his head to look at them. This made Wan Chuncheng's expression turn even uglier. If it wasn't for Crown Prince Li Yuanlong's voice in his mind, he would have probably left in a huff. Ahem. In the end, he had to fight for the opportunity himself. After adjusting his mentality, Wan Chuncheng decided to speak up himself. Although it was embarrassing enough, it was better than standing there all the time. Your Excellency, I am the Prime Minister of Jiaoxi Nation, Wan Chuncheng. I am here on the orders of my Crown Prince to pay my respects. Wan Chuncheng's voice wasn't soft. He shouted with qi in his dantian, so it was impossible for anyone not to hear him. In the end, Yang Qindong finally turned his head. Yang Qindong finally moved. Wan Chuncheng wanted to take this opportunity to say something, but before he could speak, the ridiculously young Duke of Jiaoxi spoke first. Are you the Prime Minister of Qihe from Jiaoxi? Since we are here to talk business, where is Hong Jin? I will leave this matter to you. 2 meters behind Yang Qindong stood the captive general of Jiaoxi, Hong Jin. He was here to observe how the mercenaries trained under Yang Qindong's permission. According to the sixth young master's intention, Jiaoxi would have its own army in the future, and the commander of this army would most likely be handed over to Hong Jin. When Hong Jin first heard this news, he was extremely excited. He originally surrendered to save his life, but now he really wanted to serve under Yang Qindong. It was as if he had the opportunity to come to the training ground. He stared at everything without blinking. He only wanted to learn the mercenaries' training methods so that he could form a strong army in the future. Chapter 493. He was still in the middle of studying when Wan Chuncheng's sudden arrival attracted his attention. As a former deputy general of Jiaoxi, how could he not know the Prime Minister of Jiaoxi? It was just that with his previous status, he couldn't talk to him at all and could only watch from afar. Just now, Wan Chuncheng's performance fell into Hong Jin's eyes. When he saw the high and mighty Prime Minister bowing to the sixth young master, he didn't know why, but he felt a burst of joy in his heart. He originally felt inferior because he was a surrendered general, but now it seemed that there was no difference between him and the Prime Minister. Just as he was thinking about this, Yang Qindong suddenly called out his name. This made him tremble and he couldn't believe what he had just heard. While Hong Jin was still in shock, Tiger's Mane, who was beside Yang Qindong, had already handed him a piece of paper with words written on it. This is the request for the negotiation. Take a good look. This is also a chance for you to perform well. Seize it. Tiger's Mane patted Hong Jin's shoulder as he spoke. This seemingly inconspicuous action made Hong Jin very excited. Who didn't know what kind of person Tiger's Mane was? He was Yang Qindong's most trusted person. Even regimental officers like Luo Pe and Kong Jia were very respectful in front of him. It was definitely Hong Jin's honor that Tiger's Mane thought highly of him. The excited Hong Jin immediately straightened his chest and said with an incomparably firm tone, "Please rest assured, Tiger's Mane and Tiger's Mane. I will definitely handle this matter well." Hong Jin promised solemnly. Under Tiger's Mane's signal, he came in front of Wan Chuncheng and stretched out his right hand. "Prime Minister Wan, I will be in charge of the negotiation. Please." Wan Chuncheng's original intention was to negotiate with Yang Qindong. In his opinion, this was the only way to have an equal relationship. However, Wan Chuncheng ignored him. If he insisted on staying here, who knew what would happen? Yuan Chunqing didn't want to ruin their relationship before the negotiation, so he could only sigh and agree. Thank you, General Hong. Being addressed so politely by Yuan Baicheng, Hong Jin's face was full of joy. Well said, Prime Minister Yuan, please. Hong Jin's face was full of confidence, but when he really looked at Yang Qindong's conditions, he couldn't help but have a headache. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect the sixth young master's demands to be so harsh. The higher-ups actually demanded that Jiaoji hand over all the cities other than Hanoi City. They also demanded that the Jiaoji army disarm themselves and hand over their weapons. How was this a negotiation? It was clearly forcing the other party to perish. He did not think that Yuan Chunqing would agree. Therefore, when the two of them walked out of the military camp and found a quiet courtyard to sit down, Hong Jin was prepared for Yuan Chunqing to get angry and leave. In fact, Yuan Chunqing was very angry when he saw Yang Qindong's demands. This was an impossible condition. Fortunately, he didn't come to negotiate, but to buy time. Therefore, he didn't leave in anger like Hong Jin expected. Instead, he said seriously that the Jiaoji nation wouldn't accept such conditions and asked them to lower their standards before negotiating. Yuan Chunqing suddenly said such nice words, and he didn't even say a word of anger. This made Hong Jin feel that it was unrealistic. The Beidai city general's residence was now Yang Qindong's resting place. After dark, Hong Jin came to the inner courtyard after being notified. He saw Yang Qindong, who had just finished his dinner and was drinking tea and resting. Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop and said sincerely. He wanted to call him the sixth young master, but he knew that with his current status, he didn't have the right to do so. You're here. How's the situation? Yang Qindong stretched out his hand and gestured for Hong Jin to get up. He also asked about the negotiations. Duke of Loyalty, I have already talked to Prime Minister Yuan. He thinks that our demands are too high. He hopes that we can lower our standards, Hong Jin said honestly. Lower your standards? Yang Qindong's face flashed with an unknown smile. He's not angry. Hearing Yang Qindong's question, Hong Jin was stunned at first. Then, he thought for a while and said, he's a little angry, but he doesn't show it. Ha 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 ha. At this moment, Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had made demands and conditions that were impossible for the other party to fulfill, but the other party didn't turn hostile or get angry. He only said that the demands were too high. What did this mean? It could only mean that the other party didn't really want to surrender at all. Everything was just to stall for time. So, no matter what request Yang Qindong made, they would use all kinds of reasons to reject it. The so-called negotiations, Jiaoji wasn't sincere, and Yang Qindong was never serious. This was just a way for everyone to test each other. Through this test, Yang Qindong got the result he wanted. That was, the other party was indeed stalling for time. They should be planning something. Before they were ready, they wouldn't easily turn hostile. After understanding this, Yang Qindong knew what to do. He said to Hong Jin, who was still standing on the opposite side waiting for orders, how about this, when you talk to the other party tomorrow, just say this, at the same time, in a courtyard temporarily provided for Yuan Chunqing. The Prime Minister of Jiaoji had also finished his meal and was chatting with the guard captain beside him. You've seen the training ground today, right? With your experience, if we were to go against the mercenaries now, what are our chances of winning? Yuan Chunqing asked with interest. Although it was true that he was the Prime Minister, he didn't know much about military affairs, unlike the guard beside him, who was originally a military man. Seeing the Prime Minister asking so seriously, the guard captain hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. The mercenaries' morale is very high. If we were to go against them now, I'm afraid we would lose. What are our chances of winning? After Yuan Chunqing asked, he seemed to have thought of something and said, just say it boldly. There are only the two of us here. After receiving the Prime Minister's encouragement, the guard captain looked eager to give it a try. Then, he slowly squeezed out 2 words, 20%. Hearing the words, Wan Chunqing looked at the guard captain suspiciously. Being stared at, the guard captain lowered his head and squeezed out 2 words with difficulty, 10%. Only 10%? Hearing this answer, Wan Chunqing was clearly very dissatisfied. Yes, with our current weapons and equipment, it's only 10%. However, if we can have more metal shields, perhaps we can increase it a little. If there's any way to make the mercenaries hesitate, then our chances of winning will be even higher, the guard captain answered honestly. Wan Chunqing knew that this was the truth, but this result still made him very dissatisfied. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then, he began to think in his heart. The Crown Prince had already ordered people to forge metal shields and even said that he wanted to build mobile metal carriages. If that was the case, then it wasn't like they wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Thinking about how he had already sent people to the southern Ming Empire, if they could pressure the Duke of Loyalty, then their chances of winning would increase. Sigh, what we lack is time. Wan Chunqing sighed. Whether it was forging metal shields, metal carriages, or going to the southern Ming Empire to ask for help, they all needed time. However, would the mercenaries give them enough time? How could he delay? It seems that there is a need to make some concessions on some matters. Wan Chunqing muttered to himself. The first negotiation ended without any results. The next morning, without waiting for Hong Jin to leave, Wan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him. It was no wonder that he couldn't keep his cool. After all, in comparison, he was under more pressure. Hong Jin was still thinking about how to complete the task given to him by the 6th young master. Now that Wan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him, he was no longer in a hurry. He smiled and invited the Prime Minister, whom he once looked up to sit in his courtyard and drink tea. The initiative was already in his hands, so of course, Hong Jin wasn't in a hurry. However, Wan Chunqing couldn't. Although he wanted to pretend to be very shrewd, the situation didn't spare him. Seeing that the two of them sat together and drank 2 pots of tea, he couldn't help but take the initiative to say, General Hong, do you think we can continue the negotiation yesterday? Wait, I drank too much tea. I need to go to the toilet. Hong Jin didn't wait for Wan Chunqing to finish his sentence. He pretended to be in a hurry to pee, apologized, and left. Seeing how arrogant Hong Jin was, the Prime Minister's guard said indignantly, a petty man intoxicated by success. Of course, Wan Chunqing heard this. He already knew about Hong Jin's background, and even knew that he was from the Hong family. In the past, even if someone introduced him, whether he wanted to meet such a small figure depended entirely on his mood. Now, he was the one putting on airs. Of course, he was angry. However, when he considered the big picture, he had to suppress his anger. Forget it, a great man knows when to yield, right? So what if he lowered his head in front of this petty man? Once Jiaoji obtained the final victory, not only Hong Jin, but also the entire Hong family, he wouldn't let them off easily. After comforting himself in his heart, Hong Jin waited for nearly an hour before returning to the courtyard with a satisfied look on his face. When he entered, he pretended to be embarrassed and said, my stomach isn't feeling well. Sorry for making you wait, Prime Minister. Chapter 494. Although his words sounded nice, he did not seem to be apologetic at all. Wan Chunqing did not want to lower himself to his level. As long as he could stall for time and let the other party be proud of himself, so what? General Hong, are you all right now? Can we continue with the discussion about yesterday's matter? After all, you are a citizen of Jiaoji, and the Hong family is the cornerstone of Jiaoji. For this reason, can we compromise a little? Seeing Hong Jin sit down again, Wan Chunqing was afraid that the other party was up to no good, so he said all these in one breath. Compromise a little. How? Hong Jin pretended not to understand and asked. Let's see if we can cede a few cities to the Duke of Loyalty. As you know, yesterday's request is no different from wiping out the entire Jiaoji. I really can't agree to it. Yuan Chunqing said shamelessly. No. Unexpectedly, Hong Jin shook his head and rejected the offer directly. Please don't, General Hong. For the sake of the Hong family, please compromise a little. Don't worry, when I return, I will promote the people of the Hong family and make them one of the top 6 families. What do you think? This time, in order to achieve his goal, Yuan Chunqing was really going all out. He could make any kind of promise as long as he could buy some time. As expected, when he mentioned the Hong family, especially when he said that he could make the entire Hong family one of the top 6 families, Hong Jin's eyes lit up, as if he was tempted. General Hong, you must help me. Yuan Chunqing begged for mercy again. Although he could not make the decision on important matters, if he was willing to help, he could buy some time. Perhaps it was because of Yuan Chunqing's humble attitude, or the benefits of the Hong family. This time, Hong Jin did not reject immediately. Instead, he sat there and closed his eyes. After a few breaths, he suddenly opened his eyes and shook his head again. It still won't work. The Duke of Loyalty wants Jiaoji to be completely submissive. It won't work if we give you a few cities. Ah. Hearing that it still won't work, Yuan Chunqing really wanted to cry. But fortunately, Hong Jin suddenly said, this method won't work, but there is another method that we can try. Hearing that there was still hope, Yuan Chunqing suddenly became energetic. He quickly reached out and grabbed Hong Jin's arm and asked, is there any other way? Seeing how agitated Yuan Chunqing was and how hard he was grabbing his arm, a painful expression flashed across Hong Jin's face. Hurry up and let go. You're hurting me. Oh, it's my fault. Oh right, General Hong, if you have any ideas, please tell us quickly. Seeing how easily Yuan Chunqing apologized and how anxious he was, Hong Jin felt that the time was right and said slowly, I'm sure you know what the loyal duke did after he took over Beidong City since you've been here for a day. What did I do? Facing this question, Yuan Chunqing was puzzled and thought hard. As expected of a prime minister, his mind worked quickly. It was unknown what he thought of, but he suddenly raised his head to look at Hong Jin and asked, General Hong, are you referring to Duke Zhongwei's policy towards the Han and Jiaoji people? Hearing that the topic was about to be discussed, Hong Jin couldn't help but be amazed at how smart the other party was. He nodded at this moment. That's right. The loyal duke is very good to his own people. This general has heard from him more than once that he is worried about the status and living conditions of the Han people in Jiaoji. If we can work on this aspect, we might be able to cater to his interests and give Jiaoji a chance to breathe. Hearing this, Yuan Chunqing's mind spun quickly. He thought that if he could really work on the Han people, wouldn't he be able to buy some time for the crown prince? This was the new request that Hong Jin received when he visited Yang Qindong last night. Previously, Yang Qindong was worried that the Han people would suffer losses if a war broke out. It would be great if they could save them in advance. Right at this moment, Yuan Chunqing arrived. Yang Qindong wouldn't believe that the other party wanted to negotiate or even surrender. It was already good enough that Jiaoji was under the Ming dynasty's jurisdiction. However, this wasn't the result that Yang Qindong wanted. If he wanted to raise the status of the Han people, it wasn't just about convincing the enemy. It wasn't even important to convince them. After all, who knew what would happen the next day if they were convinced today? If the current generation was convinced, what would the next generation be like? The best solution wasn't to place hope on others, but to do something with one's own abilities. For example, if Jiaoji was completely destroyed and handed over to the Han people to rule, even if there were disloyal people in the future, wouldn't it be like meat rotting in a pot? Thus, from the start, Yang Qindong had no intention of letting Jiaoji off. No matter what price the other party had to pay, it was the same. However, the reason why he agreed to negotiate was because there were some things that he needed to prepare. With the 10,000 soldiers in his hands, defeating the Jiaoji army wouldn't be a problem. The problem was that after defeating the Jiaoji army, he wouldn't have enough strength to rule this place. He didn't want to work so hard only to benefit someone else in the end. Thus, the problem of population was the problem. In order to achieve his goal of ruling this place, Yang Qindong had already sent a message to Qiqian city, asking them to gather some people and move them to Jiaoji. This would solve the problem of governance after the departure of the Lengfeng army and expand the Yang faction's influence and territory. It would take time for those people to arrive. Yang Xie's navy was about to attack Zhoushan Prefecture and other places, so it would take time as well. Thus, why not take advantage of this time to get the Han people of Jiaoji over? That way, he wouldn't have to worry about people venting their anger on them or using them to threaten him in the upcoming war. This was why he gave Hung Jin a new mission after meeting him last night. This was why Hung Jin seemed to be persuaded by Ruan Chuncheng and took the initiative to give him ideas. Otherwise, with Hung Jin's status as a surrendered general, how would he dare to come up with such an idea and make such a decision? However, how would Ruan Chuncheng know all of this? Furthermore, with his worldview and outlook on life, if there was a day when Jiaoji attacked the Great Ming, he would definitely not consider the lives of the Jiaoji people living in the Great Ming. It was precisely because of this different understanding that he decided to agree to Hung Jin's idea immediately after hearing it. However, he was still a little worried about whether Hung Jin's guess was right or not. What if everything was what they thought and the Duke of Zhongdang attacked them? Wouldn't that be bad? After making up his mind, Wan Chuncheng looked at Hung Jin with a burning gaze. General Hung, are you sure that as long as we send all the Han people in the country over, the Duke of Zhongdang will sit down and negotiate with us? I'm not sure. Hung Jin shook his head honestly, but then he said, but I know that doing this can stall for time, right? And if we can stall for time, we will have time to think of a better way, right? The moment Hung Jin said that, Wan Chuncheng's heart began to beat faster. He thought that the other party had seen through his intentions. However, when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help but relax. Yes, doing this could indeed stall for time. Even if they couldn't think of a better idea during this time, at least this could prevent the war from happening immediately. This would give the Crown Prince and the messenger to the Great Ming more time to prepare. Thinking that this was originally a matter with only benefits and no harm, Wan Chuncheng nodded and agreed, okay, we will do as General Hung said. I will send someone to send a letter to the Crown Prince and send all the Han people in the country here. However, this is a huge project. I'm afraid that it can't be done in a year or half a year. The last sentence was said by Wan Chuncheng tentatively. Because if there was really a year or half a year, the Crown Prince would be able to prepare. Once the iron shields and iron chariots could be manufactured, they would have a chance to fight against the mercenaries. At that time, with the advantage of the number of troops and the fact that they were fighting on their home ground, the chances of winning were not small. What? Half a year or a year? Ha, Prime Minister Wan, don't joke around. Do you think the Duke of Zhongdang will agree? When Hung Jin heard that it would take such a long time, he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't forget that Yang Qindong set a time limit when he gave him this task last night. Wan Chuncheng didn't really expect that it would take so long. After all, the Jiaoji country wasn't big. It wasn't like the Great Ming, where it took a long time to walk from the south to the north. When he saw that he couldn't test Hung Jin, he asked in a consulting tone, then according to General Hung, how long is it appropriate to do this thing? Hung Jin didn't speak immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and stretched out 5 fingers. 5 months? Seeing this gesture, Wan Chuncheng instinctively said. No. Hung Jin shook his head. Then it's 50 days. When he said this, Wan Chuncheng had a bad feeling in his heart. But Hung Jin still shook his head after hearing this. Then, he said in an unquestionable tone, 5 days. If it's more than that, I can't guarantee that I can convince the Duke of Zhongdang. What? 5 days? That's impossible. Yuan Chunqing jumped up from the chair and said in an agitated tone. Not to mention that he originally wanted to use this matter to delay time. Even if he really wanted to do it, it was absolutely impossible to do it in 5 days. From some places in Jiaoji to Beidai City, 5 days was far from enough. Chapter 495. As if he already knew that Yuan Chunqing would have such a reaction, Hong Jin retracted his 5 fingers and spread out his hands. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. I'll go report to the Duke of Loyalty. Maybe after lunch today, they will send troops to Hanoi City. After saying this, Hong Jin stood up and looked like he was about to leave. How could Yuan Chunqing let Hong Jin leave like this? If that was the case, wouldn't his lobbying mission have failed? Therefore, he immediately reached out and pressed on Hong Jin's shoulder. General Hong, is there anything we can discuss? How about this? How about 3 months? 6 days? 2 months? 7 days? 1 month? 8 days? Half a month? 9 days? The two of them were like peddlers and finally set the time at 10 days. 10 days was the date Yang Qindong gave to Hong Jin. Because within 10 days, Yang Qindong could basically prepare for war. In such a short time, there would definitely be some Han people who couldn't come because they lived too far away. This was something that couldn't be helped. A long night was fraught with problems. If there were a few hundred or even 1,000 Hans in 1 or 2 cities that did not arrive, Yang Qindong would definitely not allow that to happen. 10 days naturally made Yuan Chunqing somewhat dissatisfied. But he also thought that when the time came, he would just delay a bit and try to send some people over within 10 days. After 10 days, there would be more people coming. He didn't believe that at that time, the Duke of Loyalty would really dare to start a war. With each having their own plans, the two sides reached a temporary agreement. Yuan Chunqing wrote a letter personally and sent it to the Crown Prince in Hanoi City. After that, the war in Jiaoji obtained a temporary peace. Yunnan Ping Shi Wang residence. The Mu family, which was the closest to Jiaoji, had been planting their own intelligence agents in Jiaoji. They were the first to know that Yang Qindong had suddenly appeared outside Chu-Yi City with his mercenaries and occupied the city. Then, he had sent his troops to Beidai City and occupied the city. After receiving the news, Mu Bin immediately sent the information to the southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen. After that, he called Wang Ji, the current right assistant minister of the Ministry of War, to help him analyze the current situation. Along with Wang Ji was the outstanding disciple of the Mu family. Muang Muang was not even 30 years old, but he had been in the army for more than 10 years. This child of the Mu family, who had entered the military camp in his teens, not only had extraordinary skills, he was also abnormally brave and fierce when fighting. He became one of the young people of the Mu family that Mu Bin valued the most. The 3 of them were sitting in the side hall of Lord Shiping's mansion. The reason why they didn't call anyone else over was because they wanted to discuss the main point of the matter. Under such a chaotic situation, how should the Mu family make a decision? When discussing such an important matter that concerned the interests of the Mu family, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Although Muang was still young, he was eloquent and calm in the face of trouble. It was natural to call him over. Wang Ji was even more so. As someone who had been abandoned by Emperor Yingzong, he had no choice but to rely on the Mu family. His thoughts were naturally for the sake of the Mu family. As someone who almost became the minister of the Ministry of War, he naturally had good judgment. Calling him over was a good opportunity to listen to his views on the current situation. Wang Mubin of Shiping was sitting between the two of them. He listened to their opinions without saying a word. The 3 of them knew about the news. Next, it was time to express their views. The first to speak was the young Muang. He first took the information and carefully read it 3 times. Then, he shook his head. This is not possible. Everyone knows how many people there are in the mercenaries. It was not easy for them to come out alive with more than 10,000 people. How could they fight their way to the inner part of Jiaoji and occupy 2 cities? They even forced their way to Haniai city. Is there a mistake in the information? It was no wonder that Muang would think this way. It was because he could not do the same thing. Although he was considered a general of the Mu clan, even if he was given 100,000 soldiers, he would not be able to do things so beautifully, let alone 10,000. The information can't be fake. This information has been verified. Mu Bin saw that Wang Ji also did not believe it, so he spoke up to confirm the authenticity of the information. As for the verification he mentioned, it was naturally the same information sent by another intelligence team. For a matter, one person's words could be wrong and could not be trusted completely. However, when everyone said the same thing, there was no doubt that it was true. Originally, Wang Ji also wanted to question this matter. Now that he heard Mu Bin's words, he quickly shut his mouth. If he still doubted it at this time, it was equivalent to doubting Lord Shiping. For him who had offended Emperor Ingzong and had nowhere to go, if he did not cling to Mu Bin's thigh, he would really become a nobody in the world. As soon as Mu Bin said this, the side hall suddenly quieted down again. Obviously, everyone needed to digest this information. Then, after waiting for about 10 minutes, seeing that the 2 beside him had almost recovered, Mu Bin opened his mouth again and asked, "Okay, now you can say whatever you want to say. There are only the 3 of us here, so you are not allowed to speak nonsense." The so-called nonsense meant that they could say whatever they wanted. Once they left the room, they would not say it again. No one would be punished for it. Since they could say whatever they wanted, Wang Ji's small eyes rolled for a moment before he said, "If all of this is true, then the combat strength of this mercenary group is too powerful. This loyal duke is too ambitious." "What do you mean?" Mu Bin felt that Wang Ji seemed to be implying something. Seeing that Mu Bin was interested, Wang Ji knew that the opportunity to show off had come. He did not hold back and said everything that was in his mind. "Lord Shiping, think about it. If this is really done by the mercenary group, then how powerful is their strength? With such strength, why did it take nearly 2 months when the imperial court asked him to deal with the Huang bandits? With their tyrannical strength, they could just push forward. After a few battles, the untrained and disorderly Huang bandit army would scatter and flee in all directions. Not only that, if he really wanted to solve the emperor's problem and did his best, he could have come to quell the chaos in Yunnan after eliminating the Huang bandits. At that time, Prince Min was not powerful yet. He would have had the chance to kill them in Yunnan. Then, the current situation would not have been so complicated. In one breath, Wang Ji said a lot, which faintly revealed a fact. He had always thought that the mercenary group did not fully display their strength, but was hiding it. Then may I ask, under what circumstances should one intentionally conceal one's strength? Could it be that he was plotting something big? Or even the reverse? Did he deliberately want to see something happen? Did he deliberately want to see the chaos become bigger and bigger so that he could benefit from it? After all, anyone who had an invincible army would want to have space to display their strength. Otherwise, wouldn't the jewelry be covered in dust? It had to be said that Wang Ji's deduction did make some sense. Mu Bin had also heard those words, but even though they had already thought of this point, they were still unable to see through Yang Qindong's grand goal of wiping out Jiaoji, raising the prestige of the Han people, and dominating the world. It was not because of other reasons, but because their vision was too narrow. Although they were considered to be in a high position, their eyes were always on the Ming dynasty, and they were also in this environment. Since young, they were taught that the outside world was a barbarian land, and it was incomparably desolate. The center of the world was the Ming dynasty, and those places were pitifully poor. What was the use of occupying them? It was under such conservative thinking that Mu Bin asked such a question. So, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is deliberately hiding his strength. But why is he doing this? What is the use of damaging Jiaoji? Does he really want to occupy that place? Although this prince has never been there, I have heard many people say that the land there is small, and there are many people there. It is very poor. Using Mu Bin's words, Wang Ji also said, of course, he doesn't want to occupy that place. There are no benefits there. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is doing this to show off his strength. This way, others will be wary of him, and then he can achieve his goal. Goal? What goal? This time, it was Muang who asked. He. Wang Ji smiled proudly, and then asked Muang, General Mu, this old man wants to ask you. After hearing about the strength of the mercenary army, if you were to lead an army to fight him, what are your chances of winning? Muang's face turned red as if he had been asked a question. He wanted to say that he was not afraid of the mercenary army, but when he thought about the way they attacked Jiaoji, it was not something he could do. This courage dissipated in a short time, and he had to shake his head and say, if the two armies really fight, and fight with swords and spears, I'm afraid our Mu family will not be able to gain any advantage. Hearing Muang's answer without confidence, Wang Ji not only did not make sarcastic remarks, but also nodded. Let's see. Even the Mu family army does not have the confidence to win. Then whether it is Ying Zong or Min Wang, how can they talk about winning? This is equivalent to obtaining victory in terms of momentum before the battle. If they want to use this momentum to ask for something from the emperor, how can they not agree? At this point, Mu Bin, who was sitting at the side, finally seemed to have thought it through. Does official Wang mean that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage wants to be a king like this prince? There is indeed such a possibility. After all, we have received news before that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is very persistent about the throne. Wang Ji nodded and said seriously. Chapter 496. He also wants to be a king. Why? How can the emperor agree so easily? When Muang heard this, he didn't think much of it. The reason why the Mu family was so powerful now was because Mu Bin was conferred the title of king. However, if anyone could be conferred the title of king, then the title of king wouldn't be important, and it wouldn't bring so much glory to the family. In Muang's eyes, it was better to have fewer and fewer kings in the world. This way, the king's status would be more important, and he would have more confidence when he spoke. Muang wasn't the only one who thought this way, Mu Bin also had the same idea. He opened his mouth and added, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to be a king. Will the emperor agree so easily? Of course not. Wang Ji replied with a very certain tone. Then, as if he was afraid that the two people didn't believe him, he continued, King, General Mu, think about it. The reason why the Mu family can be conferred the title of king is because you have guarded the southwest for the great Ming dynasty for generations. In addition, your influence is only big in this place. Even if you are conferred the title of king, the emperor won't be so afraid. However, the Duke of Loyalty is different. He is young, and his influence is not only in the southern Ming dynasty, but also in Baiming. If such a person is conferred the title of king, wouldn't it be asking for trouble? More importantly, if there is a war in the future, how will the Duke of Loyalty be rewarded for his meritorious service? Isn't the emperor above the king? Does the Duke of Loyalty have disloyal thoughts? Hearing this, Shiping King Mu Bin's expression couldn't help but change again and again. Whether he has disloyal thoughts or not, no one knows. But once there is a slight possibility, we must be prepared. Presumably, on this point, Emperor Yingzong must have considered more than us and is more thorough. That's why this old man said it's not easy to confer the title of king. Wang Ji's understanding of Yang Qindong was limited, so he naturally didn't dare to rashly judge some things. However, based on his understanding of Zhu Qizhen, seeing that he was so wary of Yang Qindong, this inference was extremely reasonable. After saying so much, Mu Bin and Muang finally understood. The reason why Yang Qindong suppressed Jiaoji was to use this opportunity to display his military prowess and obtain benefits from Zhu Qizhen. Now, it was up to the emperor to decide. After thinking it through, Muang suddenly chuckled. Speaking of which, the loyal duke took a roundabout route for the sake of fame. In order to achieve this goal, he must have paid a heavy price to enter the Jiaoji army. Muong couldn't be blamed for saying that. He knew how strong the Jiaoji army was. Although it was still a bit worse than the Mu family's army, it was not by much. The mercenaries could win against them, but they should also be the kind that would kill 1,000 of the enemy and lose 800 of their own men. And the price he paid was nothing more than a throne, and it was very likely that he would not be able to obtain it. If that was the case, wouldn't it be equivalent to putting in effort for nothing? But no matter what, this matter had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Regardless of whether the Jiaoji army suffered heavy losses or the mercenaries were heavily injured, they were happy to see it happen. Now that the matter seemed to have been cleared up, everyone's previous worries also disappeared. This originally had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Moreover, no matter how strong the mercenaries were, it was impossible for them to find trouble with the Mu family army after defeating the Jiaoji army. Not to mention that they did not have any conflicts before. Even if they really fought with the Mu family army, what good would it do? Even if there were no benefits, who would be willing to do it? After knowing that no matter how the war developed, it had nothing to do with him, Mu Bin's expression completely relaxed. Alright, just send people to keep an eye on this matter. As for how it will develop, there must be someone who has a bigger headache than us. Mu Bin's words were correct. Prince of Min's faction also had the same attitude as him, but they did not care about their own affairs. They were currently thinking of using all their strength to conquer the entire Guangdong province. This was because during this period of time, they had sent troops everywhere and conquered many cities in Guangxi that they had yet to reclaim. Now that the entire Guangxi was in their hands, they naturally set their sights on Guangdong, especially the important Guang province. The person who Mu Bin said would have a bigger headache was naturally the southern Ming imperial court. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was the first to receive the news, was in a good mood. When Yang Qindong left Gaozhou Prefecture and went straight to Liang Mountain, he also brought Guaning, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and other generals out of Gaozhou Prefecture and took a detour to Guangzhou Prefecture. After a round of recruitment, in addition to the support of the imperial court, 10,000 southern Ming soldiers quickly gathered in the Guangzhou Prefecture and had a certain amount of military strength. However, it was also at this time that all kinds of news came from the front. Some were good, and some were bad. The so-called bad news was naturally that the Min King and the Miao army had attacked everywhere and finally conquered the entire Guangxi, allowing the Min King's forces to develop even more. There was even news that they were gathering troops. The next target would probably be the Guangzhou Prefecture that they were in. After all, as long as they conquered this place, the entire Guangdong province would not be far from falling into the enemy's hands. For this, other than continuously strengthening the city's defenses and recruiting troops, Kuang Yi continuously sent urgent documents to the capital and Nanjing to request for more support from the imperial court. Other than the bad news, there was also good news. For example, he just received the news that the Duke of Loyalty had brought his mercenaries and killed his way into Jiaoji. Not only did they pass through the complicated terrain of the Liang Mountain rainforest, but they also took over Jiaoji's Tsui city and Beidi city. The southern Ming spy in Jiaoji said that the current Jiaoji could not even take care of itself. When this news entered Kuang Ye's hands, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Now that Jiaoji was entangled, he would not be able to think about sending troops out of southern Ming. Didn't this mean that they had one less opponent? Kuang Yi was not only old, but his thinking was also very old. In his opinion, the Min King was surnamed Zhu and had the bloodline of Emperor Taizu. The battle with the emperor was an internal battle of the Zhu family. No matter what, the world still belonged to the Zhu family. They could not let an outsider take advantage of it. Good, good. The Duke of Loyalty is indeed powerful. The mercenaries did not disappoint. With the news that had just arrived, Kuang Yi, who had not smiled for a long time, drank 3 large cups of wine in his temporary residence. He even called his student, Guaning, over to drink with him. Guaning did not understand why Kuang Yi was so happy. Seeing that the drinking stopped, he asked carefully, "Teacher, this is the victory of the Duke of Loyalty. Why are you so happy? Why can't I be happy?" Kuang Yi, who was in a good mood, decided to teach his student well. He asked, "Tell me, if the mercenaries led by the Duke of Loyalty fought with the tyrannical Jiaoji army, who would win in the end?" This. Guaning shook his head. The strength of the mercenaries is indeed tyrannical, especially the continuous fire guns in their hands. No matter who is their enemy, they won't be able to gain any advantages. But in the end, their military strength is too little. They can still win some battles, but to say that they can really wipe out the entire Jiaoji army is unrealistic. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded with satisfaction and said, "According to what you said, the mercenaries will fight with the Jiaoji army until both sides suffer losses. If this is the result, it will only be good for the great Ming dynasty." Ah! At this moment, Guaning finally understood. Then he said tentatively, "Teacher, you mean that this is a battle between two tigers? There will be casualties. Even the one who wins won't get any benefits, right?" "That's right." Kuang Yi stroked his beard and said, "Actually, I admire the Duke of Loyalty very much. A hero like him probably wouldn't appear even in a few hundred years. Even Emperor Taizu was not as good as him when he was at his age. If such a person was born in a chaotic world, he would be able to create a new country. It's a pity that he was born in the wrong time. Although our great Ming dynasty is also experiencing war, our foundation is still good. Most of the people have clothes to wear, food to eat, and can live and work in peace and contentment. In such an environment, it is obviously impossible to have any great construction skills." Guaning, who was at the side, kept nodding. He agreed with his teacher's analysis. Kuang Yi didn't seem to have finished and continued, "This old man admires the Duke of Loyalty and courage, but I also fear him. This is because young people are sometimes impulsive and do not act according to common sense. I am worried that he will have other thoughts because he has the power weapon. That is why I advise the emperor to use him while also being on guard against him." Yes, we must be on guard against such people." Guaning agreed. After all, it was not the first time that one's merits overshadowed his master's. History has proven that once an official's merits were too great, there would be many rebellions. That is why I am so happy to hear this news. Just as you said, although the mercenary army is powerful, there are too few of them and their foundation is too weak. It is not possible for them to do anything to Jiaoji. The best outcome would be for both sides to suffer great losses. In that case, they would also suffer great losses. Without using a single soldier, the imperial court was able to make the two people whom they were wary of fight to the point where it was difficult to tell who would win. Moreover, they were both in a state of serious injury. Was this not good? Isn't this worthy of a celebration? Kuang Yi finally spoke clearly. When Guaning heard this, he could not help but nod. Teacher's analysis is very correct. This student will learn. Chapter 497. Ha ha ha, Guaning, you are actually very smart. Do your job well. Teacher is getting old and will retire one day. When that time comes, the Ministry of War will be under your control. Kuang Yi was so happy that he couldn't help but say what was on his mind. Guaning, who was still listening to his teacher's teachings, became excited when he heard this. This was the first time his teacher talked to him about his future. In the past, he thought that Kuang Yi only cared about serving the country and didn't think about personal matters. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that he didn't want to express it. Kuang Yi was almost 70 years old. How many more years would he be in charge of the Ministry of War? When he retires, he would arrange for his trusted aides to take over. This was human nature. At that time, it would be time for him to rise to the next level. Thank you, teacher. Guaning stood up and bowed in gratitude. Ha ha ha. Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. It seemed that from this moment onwards, the southern Ming Empire had regained its former prosperity and power. The news was still being passed around and had not reached Nanjing yet. However, when the news reached there, especially after the emissary of Jiaoji met with Zhu Qizhen, it would definitely make Emperor Yingzong, who had not been doing well recently, happy. However, these people didn't know that their happiness was for nothing. Everything that was impossible in their eyes was possible in Yang Qindong's hands. They had underestimated the Duke of Loyalty. Jiaoji Country, Beatty City. 9 days had passed since Hung Jin and Ruan Chunqing agreed on the agreement. In these 9 days, more than 20,000 Han people had arrived at Beatty City. Among them, there were hundreds of Jiaoji spies who were hiding among them. They were dressed like the Han people. In addition, they had lived together for many years, so it was easy to disguise themselves. According to Ruan Chunqing, there were at least 10,000 Han people rushing here. There were also many cities that were still mobilizing because they were too far away. All in all, Ruan Chunqing was very proactive in this matter. His actions seemed to be very fast. However, Jiaoji wasn't a small country. It was impossible to complete this matter in 10 days. This way, it would be able to stall for time. Yang Qindong had long seen through Ruan Chunqing's thoughts. He didn't point it out because he also needed time to prepare for the battle. With the Han people entering the city, it would be easier for them to conceal their military objectives. As for whether or not there were spies from the Jiaoji nation among the 20,000 Han people who had already entered the city, Yang Qindong did not care. After all, these people were going to be sent to Ryukyu Island. At that time, no matter who you are, after studying and living there, you will become a resident of Crimson City. On the surface, Yu Qian was in charge of the management of Crimson City. However, he was more in charge of managing the people's livelihood and the development of various factories. In fact, he was still implementing military control among the people. If one had to describe it, it was a bit like when China was established in the 60s. Every outsider who entered would be strictly checked. Even if you were a Han person, you would be disrupted after entering the city. Yang Qindong was playing this game. Under such a policy, Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, the militia, and even the children's regiment, as well as the residence committee, if anyone tried to do anything, they would be caught and dealt with. Even wearing a big hat on the streets was a common thing. It wasn't worth making a fuss about. Under such an atmosphere, no matter where these 20,000 Han people came from, they would only be on the same side when they arrived at Ryukyu Island. In fact, the moment these 20,000 people entered Beatty City, they were under military control. Then, they were escorted out of the city by Leng Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers to Chuyi City. At the seaside not far from Chuyi City, the Yangtze Navy's ship was already waiting there. On the ship, not only were there large amounts of firearms and ammunition produced by Crimson City's arsenal, there were also 50,000 Han people. These 50,000 Han Chinese were all young and active members who had performed outstandingly on Ryukyu Island. They were selected by various units and departments. They would become the backbone of the Jiaoji country in the future. They would lead the people here to build a new Crimson City. Of course, this so-called building was not really building a modern city. Instead, it was a transfer of management and governance. In other words, it was the continuation of Yangtze's new territory. This was also an expansion from the island to the mainland. This was the first expansion, and there was no prior experience. In order to achieve a better goal, these 50,000 people were only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch, each with 50,000 people. With these 150,000 people as the foundation, and some Leng Feng soldiers stationed here in the future, stabilizing the territory of Jiaoji would not be a problem. In truth, Yang Qindong wanted to send more people out from the island. However, these 150,000 youths were already enough to cause Crimson City to suffer. After all, what Ryukyu Island lacked the most was manpower. Being able to squeeze out these 150,000 people was because Yang Qindong had given a strict order, and his subordinates had no choice but to obey. If it had been someone else who had given this order, Yu Qian and the others would have been able to provide 20,000 to 30,000 people. Now, out of the first batch of 50,000 people, other than leaving behind 2,000 people in Qing City as the backbone to start changing the living conditions there, the remaining 48,000 people were carrying all kinds of food, drinks, and ammunition towards Beidai City. There are still too few people. A long sigh sounded out. This naturally belonged to Yang Qindong. It had been 4 years since he had come to this world. He had been working hard to reach this scale. In the eyes of others, this might be considered very impressive. However, compared to the grand goal in his heart, it was still too far away. If he had 100 million people, even if it was only 20 million people, he would dare to go to Japan and completely occupy it. He would even dare to go to the southwest and southeast of the Great Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, there were less than 1 million people in Crimson City. Most of them were from conquering the first Shang dynasty. Otherwise, the 150,000 people in front of him would be enough to make him worry. With a sigh, he thought that he still needed to encourage the people of Crimson City to have more children. Although he had done a series of encouraging measures before, many factories and land needed manpower. Some of the local women had no choice but to participate in farming. However, now that the people of Jiaoji were continuously sent to Ryukyu Island, those women could be idle. With them around, as long as the incentives were right, there was no need to worry about a large increase in the population. Turning his thoughts back, Yang Qindong raised his head and asked Tiger's Mane, "Is Nye Tong's 2nd Regiment in place?" "Young master, the day before yesterday, Commander Nye took the 2nd Regiment's Ling Feng and 10 battalions of naval auxiliary soldiers and headed towards Zhoushan Prefecture's coastline. If I'm not mistaken, they should be preparing to take action." Yang Qindong nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Regiment Commander Nye that after conquering Zhoushan County, don't rush to join us. Continue to send troops out of Sunan County and take it down first. If we need help here, let him know." In other words, there was no need for any reinforcements. With just these 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to take down Jiaoji County. Hearing this, Tiger's Mane nodded, "Yes, young master. I will inform Regiment Commander Nye of your orders. But can we really take down Jiaoji County with just us? Whether it is the military strength or the territory, it is far greater than Zhoushan County and Sunan County combined." Only Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Qindong's side for the longest time, dared to ask such a question. If it was someone else, they would only need to carry out the order. But his considerations were also very reasonable. Conquering a country was one thing, conquering it was another. If they didn't have enough military strength, they wouldn't be able to do it. Ha! Yang Qindong first smiled, but he didn't immediately answer this question. Instead, he casually pointed outside the door. Following the direction of his finger, Tiger's Mane saw Hung Jin standing respectfully outside, waiting for Yang Qindong to summon him. "Isn't there General Hung Jin?" After casually saying this, Tiger's Mane suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Young master means to use him as a general, and then, that's right." Yang Qindong directly interrupted Tiger's Mane's words and said with a smile, "That's right. There is a saying, to control the barbarians with the barbarians. We can form a Jiaoji mercenary army and let them be in charge of the security of Jiaoji County. Compared to us, they are more familiar with this place, right?" Yang Qindong was currently thinking about the Japanese army in the future. He had to admit that the Japanese army that invaded China didn't have enough military strength, so he came up with this idea. And it was because of this that he almost completed the act of a snake swallowing an elephant. Since others can use it, he can naturally use it too. In addition, he can also send some troublemakers to Resin City. In this way, without those troublemakers, Hung Jin's pressure will be reduced a lot. After Tiger's Mane understood Yang Qindong's intention, he looked at the young master with admiration. He really didn't know how the young master's brain worked. How could he come up with so many good ideas? Just like using the Jiaoji mercenary army to govern the Jiaoji people, he wouldn't have thought of this even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't that Tiger's mane was stupid. It was just that no one had used this method before, so naturally, he wouldn't have thought of it. Chapter 498. Well, go and wake Hung Jin up. Yang Qindong said casually, then turned around and sat back on the big chair. In front of Tiger's mane, he could do anything he wanted, but in front of a surrendered general like Hung Jin, he had to maintain his dignity. What was a superior? Not only did he have an imposing manner, but he also had to learn all kinds of methods and use all kinds of environments to enhance his imposing manner. Once he did it well, it would give his subordinates a lot of psychological pressure. When he issued an order, there would naturally be no second opinion. Not long after Yang Qindong sat down, Hung Jin came in under Tiger's mane's lead. As soon as he entered the room, Hung Jin knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and said in a very respectful voice. Subordinate Hung Jin greets Duke of Loyalty. As a surrendered general, Hung Jin was very clear about his identity. Not only in front of Yang Qindong, but even in front of some ordinary mercenary officers, he was very respectful. Therefore, for a long time, no one really made things difficult for him. Originally, under the leadership and teaching of Yang Qindong, the mercenaries were very particular about the equality between officers and soldiers. Even if a soldier joined the army, as long as he was not too arrogant, no one would make trouble for him. If Hung Jin's attitude was slightly better, it would be even worse to say that no one would want to make things difficult for him. Yes. Seeing Hung Jin kneeling in front of him so respectfully, Yang Qindong nodded and then said casually, "You did a good job." Hearing the praise, Hung Jin, who was kneeling there, felt happy. However, he still said cautiously, "It's all thanks to the Duke of Loyalty's good teachings." "Alright, there's no need to call me Duke of Loyalty. You're my man, so just call me Sixth Young Master from now on." Yang Qindong slowly straightened his body as he spoke. The change in address meant that he had been initially accepted by Yang Qindong. Hung Jin, who was overjoyed, quickly kowtowed to the ground and said, "Yes, Sixth Young Master." Yang Qindong could understand the slight tremor in Hung Jin's voice. After all, even though the Hung family had some power, it was still far from the Yuan, Chen, Li, Fan, Huang, and Pan families. It could be said that at this moment, Hung Jin really wanted to be understood and recognized. Yang Qindong, who fully understood this, wanted to give Hung Jin a chance to stand out. "Hung Jin, have you ever thought of putting down the things you're doing and doing something else?" The work at hand was to settle the Han people who came from all parts of Jiaoji. Even though this job didn't seem like much, most of the Han Chinese who came here were in a daze. Many of them didn't even know why they were here. They were all forced to come here by the Jiaoji army. These people didn't have any feelings of gratitude or excitement. Hung Jin knelt there with tears of gratitude on his face. Then, he kept swearing. Yang Qindong saw all this, but he wasn't moved. He didn't really want to pity anyone. Because when he thought about how the Han clan would have to be slaves for a few hundred years if it wasn't for his appearance, he was furious. Back then, did anyone pity the Han clan? Of course, the answer was no. In this world, it was sad to rely on other people's pity to survive. The most important thing was to have your own strength. As long as he had enough strength, he would be able to gain the recognition and respect of others. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. As for what Hung Jin said, it might be true now. But when he really obtained a high position, when the mercenary army's strength couldn't affect him, who knew what he would do? Instead of placing his hopes on others, it was better to set strict rules from the start. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about other people causing trouble. "Alright, stop kowtowing. Your body is your own. This young master still needs you. If you get injured because of this and can't lead the army, then I'll have to consider changing you." As Yang Qindong said this, Hung Jin knelt there obediently. Obviously, he was really afraid that Yang Qindong would change him. If that was the case, all his hard work and performance would go down the drain. Seeing that Hung Jin's breathing had stabilized, he wasn't as agitated as before. Yang Qindong's voice sounded again, "This young master can allow you to lead an army, but you have to agree to 3 conditions in advance. If you can do it, then this job is yours. If you can't do it, then there's no need to force yourself. This young master won't punish you for this. But if you can't do it, then you won't even have a chance to be free. Do you understand?" "Understood, this little one understands." "Sixth young master, just tell me what to do." At this moment, Hung Jin didn't have the ability to bargain. He had already thought it through. No matter how harsh Yang Qindong's conditions were, he would agree to all of them. No matter how high the requirements were, it was better than not knowing what would happen tomorrow. Seeing that Hung Jin agreed so quickly, Yang Qindong didn't doubt his sincerity. After all, if he was in Hung Jin's shoes, he wouldn't be able to reject the opportunity to lead an army either. Then listen carefully. First, 30,000 soldiers is a limit. No matter what happens in the future, unless there's an order for you, the number of soldiers can't exceed this number. If you're found out, you'll be stripped of your position and investigated. Second, these 30,000 soldiers must listen to the arrangements of the mercenary army unconditionally. If you or any of your subordinates dare to have any selfish thoughts, you'll be killed without mercy. Even you won't be able to escape the crime of not managing your army properly. Third, those who are capable in the Hung family can join the army. Those who aren't can't be forced to join. As for the other Hung family members who aren't young, or the elderly, children, and women, this young master will arrange for them to live in another place. I guarantee that they'll have a good life and won't be in any danger. However, they can't live in Jiaoji anymore. It's up to you to decide how to do this job. These are the 3 conditions. If you agree to them, this young master will also promise you what I just said. If you don't, then just pretend that I didn't say anything." Yang Qindong stated the 3 conditions and waited for Hung Jin's reply. He didn't have any intention of forcing Hung Jin. There were some things that couldn't be done well without the initiative. As for why he wanted to form a Jiaoji mercenary army, it was because the number of mercenaries he had was still too little. If he had to leave behind a sizable army for every territory he conquered, then no amount of mercenaries would be enough. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, Hung Jin, who was kneeling on the ground, heard everything clearly and quickly came to a decision. Sixth young master, Hung Jin is willing. Hung Jin naturally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words. He wouldn't be allowed to grow, let alone form his own faction. At the end of the day, he would only be a puppet. Even so, he was still a general of 30,000 soldiers. As long as he didn't go overboard, there shouldn't be any problems. Compared to those Jiaoji generals who wanted to go against the mercenary army, those people were destined to die. Hung Jin was already very fortunate to have what he had. Why would he be unwilling? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.